a place where you can combine romance, open world, and travel to other dimensions. A game in which you can plunge headlong into another reality and divide life into before and after. This is how you can describe the fantasy VR game called Chrono Life. And everything would be fine if another player in knight's armor hadn't insulted the hero by refusing to join the team. Another female sorceress participant tried to explain their refusal more politely, apologizing for her comrade, while a muscular man with scars on his shoulders stood behind and looked at the guy with disdain. And when all the members of the guild had already gone forward, even the little boy, holding a lollipop in his hand, could not help but laugh at the hero and his clothes. And so it was with every team John tried to join, so at some point he was left completely alone in the middle of the street. Having heard another refusal, the guy could not stand it and swore loudly. Almost crying, the hero was angry at the game, at his poor equipment, and at the whole world. The other characters looked at him like he was crazy and mocked him and his weak equipment. But John could not accept defeat and, hearing their words, shouted that they did not understand anything, and that weapons could not be useless if a lot of gold was spent on them. Suddenly, a girl from the crowd noticed his hysteria. The guy looked up at her only when she hesitantly tried to address him, coming closer. Lilith seemed to sparkle with her beauty and innocence, awkwardly shifting from foot to foot and holding a neat staff with her thin hands. John immediately blushed, looking the girl up and down, surprised that she even approached him and asked what she wanted. With a dazzling, sparkling smile, Lilith herself invited the hero to join her team. Grinning widely, John realized that this game was the best since it had such beauties. Some time passed, and the heroes were already walking through the forest, and Lilith was praising the guy, who giggled smugly at this. John proudly boasted that he spent most of his parents' allowance on gold bars in the game, which is why he has such equipment. And the girl began to admire him again, asking how much he had already improved. John promised meaningfully that she would definitely be surprised. The guy proudly added that he bought up all the beginner sets for 55,001, as much as he could afford. With a gleam in his eyes, the hero showed off a sword from such a set. Lilith smiled dazzlingly. "Cool, you look just like a knight." At that moment, John felt as if lightning had struck him straight in the temple and in the soul. The guy went deep into himself, imagining daily walks together, smiles, laughter. How one day, surrounded by flowers, their tender first kiss in the game will happen. Or how he would one day kneel down in front of her under the rays of the setting sun. John was already imagining how paintings in a gold frame with the happiest moments of their lives would hang on the snow-white wall of their shared home. And of course, as a little girl, she will meet him with her mother after work. Lost in his dreams, the guy was already thinking about what name he could give her. Lilith's steps suddenly stopped, interrupting the hero's lost thoughts. The girl said that they had come to the right place. It turned out to be an empty space in the forest, hidden by trees. The hero was surprised by this, looking around. There was a sudden clang of the sword as its blade passed through John. The guy immediately started coughing up blood, shocked by what was happening. His base health stats instantly began to decrease. The hero fell onto the grass with a crash. Shocked, he tried to comprehend what was happening, breathing heavily as the iron taste grew stronger in his mouth. A bright red pool of blood was already forming behind him. He asked hoarsely, "For what?" trying to make out Lilith's expression. When the guy suggested that it was his weapon, a sly grin appeared on her face. The girl smiled as if nothing had happened, saying that the hero could keep this trash for himself. John was amazed by her words, not understanding if this was the same cutie that was 5 minutes ago. And Lilith added in the same tone that she lured him into the forest, away from prying eyes, in order to kill him. The guy, shocked, recalled that the girl had invited him to join the team, and she answered with a smile that she lied because she didn't need someone like him on her team. As if trying to finish him off, she unashamedly called him a poor loser. John's face was unreadable, but it was clear that her words had hit him harder than a sword to the stomach. Lilith continued that since the hero is scraping bottom even in the game, then in life, most likely, he is the same, and it is unlikely that he would not be afraid to approach her outside the game. When the girl sarcastically added that the guy's parents were also poor, his gaze darkened with anger. John clenched his teeth. Slowly, on trembling legs, he rose from his knees. In a hoarse but firm voice, he quietly said, "Enough." And a second later, his face and his eyes filled with anger as he hissed that she had crossed all boundaries. Suddenly, Lilith cut his body in half, not letting him finish. Drops of blood stained her from head to toe. The girl only snapped at his words. The hero coughed up a rag of blood as he fell to the ground. His body parts flew in different directions. At this time, the system's voice announced that Lilith had fulfilled the conditions and was eligible to move to the hidden class. The pink strands instantly turned black, starting from the ends. The neat black short dress began to transform after them, along with her staff. So it became long and white, and the staff increased in size and changed in design. Snow-white wings spread out behind her, feathers flying in all directions. The system announced that the transition was complete, and Lilith became the goddess of life. A sweet, satisfied smile touched her lips. With a charming expression, the girl rejoiced that she had finally reached 1,000 victims. She stretched as if nothing had happened, pleased with her success. Then the girl easily stepped over the hero's upper body in her white heels. She moved further and further away, glad that now she only had the main quest left. Barely keeping his eyes open as drops of blood framed his mouth, the boy realized the terrible truth about this game. It was the law of the jungle. He closed his eyes in exhaustion as the system announced that his character had died. After some time, the system's voice is heard in a small alley, informing that the hero has lost most of his experience and will be reborn in a safe place. The guy was completely reborn again, but there was no joy in his eyes. He remembered Lilith's words about him being a beggar, that he himself would never approach her outside the game. He gritted his teeth in resentment and anger. John also remembered the knight who had rudely refused him, and then about the child who made fun of him and his clothes. For several minutes, the guy stood silently, his head down, and then he began to cry uncontrollably because the little he had was also taken away from him, and even his pride was trampled. Wiping away crocodile tears, the hero reached into his pocket. John pulled out a craftsman's hammer, which improves a piece of equipment by 1. Then he pulled out the knight's sword with 3 units. With furious determination, the boy swung his weapon. When the hammer reached the sword, a halo of dust and magic surrounded the hero. The boy gritted his teeth, realizing that the best way to become stronger was to improve his equipment. The system indicated that this could not be done when the sword was broken in half. John's face was a mixture of anger and shock, but he couldn't stop himself. Following the sword, the guy pulled out bloody iron bracers. After the hammer blow, nothing was left of them either. And now, all his weapons lay like a pile of rubbish around him. The hero's lips stretched into a smile. In a strained smile, because from the loss of part of the set, he automatically loses the entire set, and therefore the clothes. A hopeless, stingy tear rolled down his cheek as John once again realized that he didn't like the game. Then a club fell at his feet with a thud. It was a beginner's weapon, and at her current level it was almost useless. The hero looked up in surprise to see who had given it to him. A character in the most basic clothes with an unchanging smile on his face waved at him. The player continued to wave, and the boy raised an eyebrow, surprised by his strange behavior. Judging from his nondescript appearance, John realized that he was a fellow newcomer. The guy glanced down at the stick again. He couldn't believe it, but apparently this character was giving the weapon to him. The player gave a thumbs up, flashing his heroism, and the hero felt like an even bigger loser, realizing that this newbie simply took pity on him, seeing him in his underwear while the character was saying goodbye. For a few minutes after, John sat next to the stick, not daring to even look at it. Then he looked at the club with a glimmer of hope. Without thinking, the guy hit it with a hammer, and the system notified that his weapon had been improved by 1 unit of additional damage. The hero struck the club again, and the system's voice again confirmed the improvement in the level. A look of melancholy crossed his face at the thought that such mechanisms were always being put into completely useless objects. But then he banged the tree against the tree a couple more times, hearing the equipment improving. The additional damage of the baton was now plus on 64. John swung again, thinking that the club would soon break anyway, and the higher the level, the higher the probability of breakage. So he continued to hit the stick over and over again, over and over again. The city was already illuminated by the setting sun. The hand that the guy held the hammer in ached from tension and fatigue. Although he himself sat and was covered in sweat, shaking from head to toe, the hero bit his lower lip. With one last sharp movement, he swung and struck the club. A golden haze surrounded him, and the system again said that the equipment had been improved. The club sparkled in a golden glow with a new maximum status, level 99. With a trembling hand, John picked up the weapon, examining it in surprise. He wondered, how could a simple stick reach level 99? This was impossible because after the 10th time, the probability of success of each subsequent improvement decreases by 5%. At this point, the club slipped out of his hands. John tried to catch the slippery stick with trembling fingers. Finally, he grabbed it firmly with both hands, but the tip barely touched the ground. At that moment, the stones under the guy flew up, and he himself opened his mouth in shock. Dust, boards, pieces of tiles, stones, everything was scattered around. The earth itself was divided into 2 parts. Along with it, the planet was cut in half. And after that, the wave moved further, causing a huge explosion in the solar system. A moment later, the boy sat silently just a couple of centimeters from the destroyed ground. John screamed in fright, gradually realizing what had just happened. The players came running to the noise, also trying to understand what had happened. Some even thought it was a dragon attack. People ran in panic towards the destruction, running around John, unaware that he was the one causing it. The hero himself still sat in a stupor and looked ahead, unable to say a word. The continent in front of him split in two in a matter of moments. On that day, a new world record in VR gaming was entered into the Guinness Book of Records. The system notified John that his reputation had been increased due to the player's murder. And when such notifications started appearing again and again, it became clear that the world record was for the number of players killed with one hit. The guy realized what was happening because the notification sound did not stop. A wide grin appeared on his face, although that was all that was visible due to the setting sun. John remembered Lilith's words about his parents and his unsuccessful life. The hero continued to chuckle, his grin turning into a victorious grin. He remembered how he would pay with his life for his knowledge. Then, through my own experience, I learned about the essence of the game. The hypocrisy and cruelty of other players came to mind. This is how John learned that the law of the jungle applies in this game. The guy sat with an unreadable face, holding a baton in his hands. She was glowing with her level 99 gold status, and the hero's face shone with anger and a desire to take revenge on his offenders. In reality, the guy was a nobody, of unprepossessing appearance, of average height. He did not excel in either his studies or sports. If we were to describe his life in gaming terms, his level would be Bronze 4. The sun rose over the city again. There was a quiet rustling of bare feet on the ground. John walked slowly across the town square, wearing only his raincoat and underwear. Now something has changed in him. Suddenly, he bumped shoulders with a heavyset player. The big guy turned to the guy with insults. He grabbed the hero by the chest with his large, rough hand. The man shouted that the boy was blind, and his wife, suddenly appearing behind him, smirked that John could be left alone. He was already scared. The guy didn't react to their words in any way here. In the game, he was different. Suddenly, the hero quietly called the player a pig's snout. The big guy clearly didn't expect this from a weak-looking loser. The man began to scream and tightened his grip, but the club had already reached his cheek. He was taken aback, noticing out of the corner of his eye a tree near his cheek. Anger appeared on his face again. The big guy yelled that the hero wouldn't do anything to him with his useless stick. But at that moment, he was prevented from finishing his sentence by a shockwave from the useless stick, knocking out his jaw. At first, the man, engulfed in golden light, flew to the side. Then the golden beam headed straight into space, where the big guy also flew. His wife recoiled in fear, and dust rose in a column around her. But John had already turned to her, his club ready. The weapon fit perfectly in his hand, as if it had been created for this very moment. Here John was invincible. In this game, he is the main character. The smug smile and the fire of revenge in his eyes never left his face. Suddenly, the system notified that the weapon's durability had dropped sharply. The club's durability level was now only 3.5. The hero looked at the club in surprise. Sometime later, John sat alone in front of the weapon in that very alley, his knees pulled up to his chest. Indignation and sadness from the inevitability mixed on his face. The status of the stick showed that due to its low durability, it would break after a couple of hits. The guy continued to stare at the club, hoping for a miracle. Then he sadly plopped down on the ground, gradually realizing that he only had 3 hits left, since he had only made 2, and his durability was down to 3.5. John continued to lie on the cold ground, looking at the sky. As much as he didn't want to admit it, he wasn't in the best position right now. He looked at the sun through the roofs of the houses, realizing his hopelessness. The hero really wanted to take revenge on those who laughed at him, and even more so to deal with Lilith. He looked at the sky for a few more minutes. Suddenly, John clenched his teeth in anger. The guy jumped to his feet in one movement. The hero whispered that he still had 3 hits. An unexpected determination appeared in his eyes again. A gloomy place full of skeletons and sharp rocks, the Valley of the Dead. John stepped forward, stepping on another skull, although the entire road was paved with them. His expression was unreadable, but there was definitely no fear there. The hero muttered something unintelligible under his breath. Suddenly, some kind of lilac glow appeared from behind the rocks. The guy turned around at some noise in that direction. His face was covered with a shadow of determination. Suddenly, John was surrounded by columns of dust. Huge purple eye lights sparkled out of the darkness. The terrifying 2-headed dragon appeared in all its glory. The entire cave shook from the menacing roar of both heads. But the hero looked at him imperturbably. As the game's strongest boss swung his huge paw, he creaked in a creepy voice. "Insignificant mortal!" The beast moved towards the guy, squealing loudly that he had crossed the line of the dead. Rocks crumbled. Skulls flew from side to side. But John stood his ground when the system explained that in front of him was the two-headed dragon Eurus. The monster approached the guy, shouting that this place was the line between life and death. The dragon cried out that the hero was a fool and was now doomed to eternal torment. But at that moment, he was abruptly cut off by a golden light from John's club. A moment later, only a trace remained of the monster's head. The beast looked at his missing part with surprise, and the hero picked up the club from the place where the force of the blow had formed a black hole. John whispered quietly that he only had 3 hits left. The dragon looked at the absolutely calm guy in shock. At that moment, the system announced that John had 2 hits left, and he thoughtfully scratched his back with his baton. And then he shouted, looking threateningly at the monster, that he would kill it if its strength was not enough for more. The beast recoiled in fear. The dragon immediately began to beg the guy to wait. John continued to scratch his back, looking at the monster skeptically. The beast begged the hero to let him speak and call him boss. John skeptically asked if Eurus had just called him a fool, to which the beast immediately began to justify himself, saying that according to the plot, he was obliged to say this. The dragon swallowed hard, a bead of sweat rolling down his mouth. The beast asked who the hero was anyway. To this, John grumbled that Eurus should not bother him. He would kill the dragon anyway. Not giving the beast a choice, the guy swung his club. Everything around was illuminated with a golden glow. The monster roared, flying back. With a crash, the dragon fell onto the skeletons. He was breathing heavily, blood flowing into a pool from his huge mouth. John clicked his tongue in irritation, and Eurus, as if he had learned the whole essence of existence, was unable to rise. The club's durability was now only 1 of 5, meaning the hero only had 1 hit left. John sighed, frustrated that he couldn't do anything about the durability. The monster heard this, and it dawned on him. Eurus hopefully offered to inhabit John's weapon. The hero scratched the back of his head with his club, realizing that the dragon could have deceived him. Then he asked again what the dragon meant. Suddenly, the guy received a notification about a pact in which Eurus voluntarily gives him his soul. John didn't know whether to accept the task from the system. Taking advantage of the guy's confusion, Eurus asked if he had heard anything about ego swords. The hero didn't know about this and asked for clarification. Eurus muttered that it would take a long time to explain, to which John asked to be brief. Then the beast said that he would inhabit the hero's weapon. He explained that the weapon would thus have a soul and would evolve into an ego sword. But when the dragon added that to all this there would also be infinite durability, the hero had an idea. Eurus assured that the ego sword was the most powerful weapon in Chrono Life, and John suddenly giggled. Then a loud laughter echoed throughout the cave, bouncing off the walls. The dragon laughed awkwardly along with him. He tried to ask if his boss agreed with the proposal, while the guy continued to laugh uncontrollably. Having calmed down, John muttered that he had changed his mind about taking revenge. And then he grinned evilly, seeing how much the game wanted him to do it. Eurus trembled with fear when he saw the crazy expression on the hero's face, and mentally asked his mother to take him away from there. With a wide grin, John clicked the accept button, and the system responded that the quest was accepted. Suddenly, a huge purple pentagram appeared below him. The pentagram stretched out under Eurus, and the lilac light spread throughout the cave. Gradually, the huge dragon wings began to disappear. When the dragon itself dissolved into the program codes, the system announced that Eurus's physical body had disappeared. A purple glow enveloped the club, as the system's voice confirmed that the monster's soul had entered the weapon. From then on, the baton's status was highlighted in purple, and the weapon's class became Ego, and its durability was equal to infinity. A wide grin spread across John's face. But before he could celebrate, he heard rustling sounds. Monsters from all corners climbed straight towards the hero. They shouted that their master demanded revenge. Loud roars and cries of "Revenge! Revenge!" could be heard from everywhere. While the beasts cried out for retribution, John stood motionless, not even moving. The army of Eurus, mingling together, stood like a wall, and in front of them the hero looked very small. The guy grinned evilly. "Well, then I will take revenge." For a second, the image of Lilith appeared in his memory. He raised his club up and shouted loudly, "Revenge!" echoing the cries of the dragons. The baton's beam once again hit the planet and reached space. At this time, the city, despite the serene sky, was also restless. The players crowded around a board with someone's face and the words "Wanted" written on it. Everyone understood that the wanted man was dangerous and were tense. The guard standing next to the board announced an SSS rank reward for the villain's head. People became even more tense when they heard that this villain had killed over 800,000 people in one day, which was the worst mass murder in the history of the game. The bounty notices for his head were spread throughout all 12 kingdoms, on all 3 continents. They were on every street, even the smallest one, on every corner. The guard announced that the reward was 1 trillion gold. The players whispered in shock, not believing in such a huge reward. Then the sound of marching footsteps was heard. Soldiers in golden armor with shields of the same color walked in a row. The players realized that these were not just knights. After all, each of their armors had the coat of arms of the royal guard engraved on it. People noticed the one who commanded them walking in the distance. The leader of the Golden Guild was a beautiful girl named Andrea. On the other side were soldiers in red cloaks with white crosses embroidered on them. The leader of the White Crosses Guild was Stanford, and his right eye bore scars reminiscent of his exploits. The army in caps and purple robes was already lined up in rows. The leader of the Holy Land Guild was the most powerful sorceress in the kingdom, Gloris. Following them, the Robin Hood Thieves Guild appeared, led by Duncan. And behold, the silver armor sparkled in the sun. Another army followed after the others. The blue flag fluttered in the wind. The knights with the azure coat of arms stepped aside to let the leader through. It was Hawkeye, the king of this country, who commanded the Guild of Justice. The players watched what was happening in amazement. Because the 5 strongest guilds gathered in one place for the first time, the alliance of these 5 flags was the strongest alliance in the world. Hawkeye spoke up as the leader of the World Alliance. The Knights of the 5 flags stood motionless, awaiting orders. The entire alliance listened in anticipation as he declared all-out war on the mass murderer of players, to the one whose face is imprinted on the arrest warrant. Meanwhile, John was studying the new club with its current characteristics. The guy looked at the weapon thoughtfully. Then he grinned, baring his teeth. His laughter echoed down the now familiar alley. Suddenly, Urus emerged from the weapon, glad that his boss was in a good mood, and the hero screamed in surprise. John was scared that someone's head was sticking out of his club and asked what kind of creature was in front of him. The beast introduced itself as a 2-headed dragon. John was surprised when he looked at the little animal. He remembered the huge monster from the cave, and then he looked again at the little creature from the club. Urus reminded that he had already said, his soul will inhabit the hero's weapon. The little dragon added that this was a normal occurrence for weapons of the ego level, and only the hero could see and hear it. But the guy didn't listen very closely, being touched by the dragon's new form. John replied that he generally understood, but he was curious as to where the beast's second head had gone. At first, Urus didn't understand what the question was about. Then he turned his head to the side and saw that an important body part was missing. And then he sadly asked where she really went. Then a piece of paper flew towards them. The hero picked up the leaflet that had flown away. His face was emblazoned in the center with a huge sign about the reward. To say that he was surprised is to say nothing. And looking at the sky, the hero saw that there were thousands of these leaflets, on the walls of any building, everywhere where people walked. His face was in every available place. Urus immediately squealed in delight. The beast circled around John, praising his boss that there was no way a dragon could kill 800,000 people with one blow. Urus rejoiced that they would even give real money for the hero, a whole trillion. At this time, John asked, while chewing chicken, if NPS like Urus could say anything about real money, since they don't know about it. To this, the little animal replied that he didn't care. He was already in the next world. Urus changed the subject to the hero, asking what he planned to do since they would hunt him day and night. The little beast asked in a terrifying tone, "Shouldn't we deal with humanity right now, boss?" The guy thought, continuing to chew. He looked again at the fallen leaflets. John chuckled as he looked at his portrait. The hero chuckled maliciously, thinking how cool it really was to feel like a celebrity, and Urus tensed up again. The guy calmed down and said with a smile that he would act according to the LPS principle. Urus naturally asked what he was talking about. The hero explained that this is a technique where a very powerful and strong character pretends to be weak and harmless. The beast asked why John should tolerate being treated like a loser, ignored and despised. To which the guy replied with a smile, "You don't understand anything." He added that it's cool when no one around knows that the person in front of them is not just a weakling, but the main character of the game. John continued to say that he would enjoy a peaceful life in the game when suddenly an arrow pierced his back. Urus looked at this in shock, unable to say a word. The arrow passed through the boy's body, and its tip sparkled on the other side. A bloody cough escaped his throat. The guy fell flat on the ground. Urus shouted in panic, "Boss! and flew up to the hero. The blue case was still full of glittering arrows. The next one has already been pulled onto the bowstring. Hawkeye stood on the roof of one of the buildings, and behind him was a huge army of the Justice Guild. It was he who shot these arrows. The sound of knights' footsteps could be heard from afar. The menacing march could be heard from the other side as well. The hero lay motionless on the road. In a moment, he was surrounded by a huge army led by the king. Hawkeye ordered John to be captured and imprisoned. The guy continued to lie there, unable to move. The knights shouted in one voice, "It will be done!" The frightened dragon tried to bring the hero to his senses, shouting that people, although weak, in such numbers would definitely defeat him. Meanwhile, the knights were getting closer and closer. Suddenly, the guy sat up, coughing up blood again. First, John got down on one knee, and then, on trembling legs, he rose completely. The army tensed, preparing their weapons. Hawkeye shouted that there would be no mercy for the villain. The knights rushed to attack. Urus continued to nervously fly around his boss, and John gritted his teeth and hissed, "I've changed my mind." With a sharp jerk, he pulled the arrow out of himself. The guy threw it aside as if nothing had happened. His free hand gripped his baton tightly. Looking at all the players who were against him, the hero concluded that he no longer liked living by the LPS principle. A wide, sinister grin spread across his face as he shouted that they had asked for it. A golden beam pierced the solid ground, and along with it, part of the army. The golden light also engulfed Hawkeye, who opened his mouth in surprise. The flash of the impact once again reached the universe. People, like bugs, spread out on the ground. The leader was breathing heavily, unable to rise. He couldn't believe that just one blow had caused him so much damage. All the buildings in this place were razed to the ground, not to mention the people. Inexpressible horror passed over the king's face. The capital of the First Kingdom was destroyed in one fell swoop. The hero had already approached the Hawk's Eye. The man tensed even more, and John walked calmly and waddlingly over the soldiers' bodies. Hawkeye began to rummage through his inside pocket. He suddenly pulled out a one-use summoning crystal that would summon any number of players to help him. Without further ado, the king smashed the ball in his fist, and its fragments began to glow with a blue light. A blue pentagram surrounded the man, creating a cylindrical barrier around him. There were more and more of these pentagrams. They surrounded John. Hawkeye called out to all members of the United Forces Guild. The blue glow grew brighter as the system announced a mass teleportation of players. Hordes of new soldiers appeared inside the pentagrams in an instant. There were more and more of them. John looked around, realizing he was surrounded again. Meanwhile, the knights gradually surrounded him. The guy now had nowhere to run. The Guild of United Forces was huge. There are approximately 3 million of them in total, and all of them teleported to the battlefield at once. The king pointed his finger at the hero. Then he shouted, "Charge the villain!" People rushed towards John without question. The guy sighed without moving from his spot. With a sharp movement, he swung his club. A golden streak pierced and divided the earth. The soldiers, along with the strongest generals, fell powerlessly from the beam's effects. Urus looked at this picture in amazement. John swung his club again. A gust of air followed her, and another shockwave passed through the guild. Urus became more and more stunned. He remembered shouting that people were weak, but not when they were in large numbers. The simple truth dawned on the dragon. Even if Urus is the strongest boss in this world, he is not able to defeat all players at the same time. He could only defeat such elite warriors from all over the world by summoning his own army. That's why he was sure that it was better to get out of there, but John was stronger. The warriors in red armor now sharpened their swords. The general was more confident of his victory than ever, despite the heavy losses. The red crosses pounced on John, but he did not react. And even when the blades glittered right above his head, the guy didn't move. John flashed a grin and pulled the baton out from his bosom again. The golden light pierced through another batch of enemies. It spread even further, dividing the continent again. At this time, the most powerful witch whispered a spell into her purple staff. She was guarded by magicians, located in another blue pentagram. John took notice of this. Suddenly, a new pentagram appeared above his head, and Glorus cast a spell of ancient destructive magic. The pentagram swirled in the air. John watched this with surprise, and just a second later, a huge magical beam from the pentagram suddenly headed straight at him. John muttered under his breath that the spell sounded really cool. Illuminated by the beam, the guy added that he would also need a spell for his attacks. John pulled the club from behind his back again. The power of the weapon once again pierced the planet, and with it the solar system, and the name of this technique was Annihilation. In the middle of the pentagram there was only a hole and a light haze around the edges, and then her sides began to crack. and suddenly the whole structure shattered like a mirror. The girl screamed, realizing that her ancient spell was broken. She called over the royal mages, preparing to give the command. But then they noticed John raising his stick above his head. The hero said quietly but firmly, "Blow." A golden glow pierced the space from the earth to the sky, and the magicians also flew off in different directions. John was fighting alone against 3 million people, and while it wasn't exactly spectacular, it was definitely a disaster for the players. The entire Guild of United Forces was completely defeated. Hawkeye sat among a pile of lifeless bodies. He was shaking, his breathing was ragged, and his heart was pounding in his temples. The man muttered the same thing under his breath, not believing that such a thing was even possible. And John had already approached him, blocking the sun. The guy said he wouldn't kill him, even though he was the one who made him lose his temper. Hawkeye asked why in surprise. At this, the hero sighed with a smile, and he reminded the man that it was Hawkeye who shot him with a bow. The king was frightened, tears sprang to his eyes, but at that moment the club had already touched his jaw. As expected, the battle was on everyone's lips. This situation interested even those who don't play games at all. The hero stood among a mountain of dead people on the half-destroyed land of a once beautiful continent. The club glittered in the setting sun. The guy frowned, looking at the weapon. Finally, Eurus emerged from the stick, rejoicing that his boss had been great, and John was relieved that the dragon had not disappeared. Suddenly, the sound of snow-white heels was heard. The guy turned around at the sound. The female silhouette approached John with calm grace. The hero was surprised that someone else remained alive. He started to say how annoying it was, but suddenly the girl's familiar features became clear in his eyes. They stood opposite each other, illuminated by the orange light of the sunset. It was Lilith herself. For a few seconds, John stood in a stupor. Then his surprise turned to anger. At this, a slight smile touched her lips. She said in a charming tone, "Long time no see, Mr. Loser." The sun was setting over an endless expanse strewn with the bodies of 3 million people. Countless swords and spears were scattered across the ground. The hero thought that his second meeting with this girl was quite fateful. Her taunts came back to me again. The hand holding the club trembled with anger. John clenched his teeth, the veins in his neck standing out. But for some reason at that moment he felt like laughing. They stood facing each other for a few more moments. Lilith asked him how he was doing with a charming smile. She also noted that she certainly didn't expect to meet him in such circumstances, but fate itself brought them together. The guy replied with a crooked smile that he understood perfectly well. She was looking for him with the intention of killing him. The girl smiled slightly. "Is that what you think of me?" she asked, almost affectionately. The hero frowned again, her calmness getting on his nerves. He then said that he would have split her skull open right there, but he had questions. He looked at the girl and then asked why her hair was a different color. Lilith giggled, glad that he noticed. She recalled that killing a hero in the past was a sacrifice that helped her enter a new hidden class, the goddess of life. I remembered her transformation and the phrase about the long-awaited 1,000 victims. Lilith lost with a lock of hair, explaining that this was the reason why her hair color changed. John listened carefully to all this. Then the guy sighed, not reacting in any way. The baton was already pointed towards the girl. John asked why she was the goddess of life and not death, even though she sacrificed 1,000 players. But his threatening gesture did not bother her at all. She smiled wider, replying that it was indeed funny. "You'll die laughing," John hissed furiously. He slammed his club down on the ground where she was, but Lilith had already flown up. John hissed that he had his answers, and now it was time to teach her a lesson. Lilith asked, a little disappointed why so quickly. And a new blow pierced the earth in its place. The hero stood on the destroyed land, among smoke and dust. He looked up, looking for where she had flown to again. "What a pity!" the girl exclaimed through the dust. The guy shuddered, realizing that she was behind him, and the girl added that she would like to talk some more. He ran furiously towards her, clutching a weapon in his hand. Another blow from the club passed along the ground, and the golden light took the girl with it. The ground in that place split in half. Eurus cried out in delight that it was a direct hit. The dragon was sure that now his master had caught this slippery herring. John chuckled that people like her only knew how to bluff. But then a silhouette with a staff appeared from the fog again. The hero's eyes widened in surprise. In the huge hole left by the blow from the stick stood a completely unharmed Lilith. She smiled and admitted that the guy had become much stronger, but it is impossible to defeat her with this club. Eurus, in fear, pressed himself against his master's face. John, screaming that the girl had survived even after that. While the hero tried to remove the dragon from himself, the girl looked at it motionless. She was no longer smiling, but she looked very intently. And then Urus noticed her gaze. He couldn't believe it, but it seemed she saw him, although no one except the owner could. Finally, the hero tore the dragon away from himself and returned to the conversation. He was sure he had hit her right, but there wasn't a scratch on her. The girl replied that she was the goddess of life, and he was a mere mortal. He will never kill the goddess. The guy took the information calmly. Scratching the back of his head with a stick, he said with a smile that he was incredibly angry, and he suddenly ran up to her again. John swung his club furiously. He approached her in a matter of seconds, but there was a deathly calm on the girl's face. There was a loud roar from the impact force. The boy swung his stick again, and again the earth was pierced by a blow. The hero did not stop his lightning-fast strikes. The explosion reached the solar system, piercing the planet through and through. Urus watched this from a distance, but the tremors of the earth were hard to miss. The dragon was afraid that at this rate his boss would destroy the entire planet. But Lilith didn't care. The fog and dust cleared and she spread her wings. The condescending smile never left her face. The girl flew above the hero, showing that she was always one step ahead. John was starting to get tired of this. He was breathing heavily, clearly tense. Lilith's snow-white wings spread out again, and a moment later they began to disappear, leaving behind a trail of feathers. The girl landed smoothly. The sight of her neat heels contrasted sharply with the ruined ground. With a smile, she assumed that John missed her madly, thought about her, dreamed of revenge. The girl, clicking her heels, came closer and closer. Lilith assured that no matter how much time passed, no matter how hard he tried to become stronger, the guy would not be able to kill her. Her face was inches from his as she finished the sentence with a venomous smile. John frowned and closed his eyes. The guy sighed boredly. He turned around demonstratively. His steps gradually moved away from her. Lilith asked if he was giving up so easily. John didn't react to this in any way, but only began to warm up his right hand with the baton. A few minutes later, he replied that he was trying to see how much force he could put into a blow to break through. The girl smiled and again reminded him that he couldn't kill her, but John interrupted mid-sentence, adding that he would be breaking through the planet, not her. His answer even seemed to intrigue the girl. He turned to her and asked with an almost insane grin, "Since I can't defeat you, maybe I should destroy this planet?" Finally, the smile disappeared from her face. She quietly said that his train of thought was interesting. But could a mere mortal like him do something like that? He replied that this is precisely why he calculates the force of the blow. He remembered that he had hit the ground many times today, but all these blows were far from full force. Lilith tensed even more, a shadow of anger appearing on her face. She asked if the guy had taken into account that he would die with her, especially since he himself was mortal. Her question about whether he was ready to die for revenge stirred up old grievances in him. John has already paid with his life for knowing the laws of this world. He suddenly chuckled softly. Again, I remembered the beginning of his journey through insults and rejection, and the quiet giggling turned into uncontrollable laughter. The hero learned the law of the jungle from his own bitter experience. Having finished laughing, he continued speaking. His motivation was not simply blind revenge. But someone like you can't understand, the hero concluded. Yes, it would be revenge that would lead to his own demise. But he had nothing to lose in the first place, and even less so when the club was over his head. Lilith visibly tensed, not expecting such determination. She tried to stop him by taking a couple of steps back. But John had already raised his hand above the ground, intending to finish what he had started. The end of the club touched the floor with a rustling sound. Everything around shook. The earth seemed to be splitting at the seams. Finally, fear appeared on Lilith's face. Urus also flew out of the club in horror. And on the hero's face there was a mad, victorious grin. The force of his blow literally cut through the ground like a watermelon. In an instant, it swallowed the entire planet, and a moment later the planet turned into a glowing ball. Before it exploded into 1,000 pieces, the blast wave illuminated everything around. The light was so bright that it was reflected even in the darkness of the solar system. It was incredibly blinding and equally terrifying. Suddenly, a wall of binary code appeared in place of the planet. Meanwhile, in the real world, in the game capsule building, the huge blue hall of VR capsules, as always, worked continuously in silence and tranquility. Only one man sat among the capsules with a bored look. Someone's obscene language caught his attention. Players climbed out of their capsules one after another, cursing that they had been kicked out of Chrono Life. They were all puzzled as to why they had been thrown out. And then everyone turned to that same admin, intending to get answers to the curses. In response, the admin tried to calm them down. He explained that the problem was not with him or with electricity. One player suggested that there was a problem with the server, to which others responded with skepticism. Suddenly, one guy received a notification about an update on the game page. The creators reported that there was indeed a technical error on the server and promised to fix it and later explain what the cause was. However, one capsule was still working. A man's silhouette and the words "occupied" were visible on it. And in the game, there was still a wall of binary code. The system was rebooting, counting players and identifying them. After some manipulation, the system's voice announced that there was only one player in the game. At this time, John stood among the cells and digital codes. The guy looked around in amazement, wondering where he was. The hero took a couple of steps forward in space. He scratched the back of his head in confusion, as if remembering that he was not here. "ST-389, came a voice from behind. Someone in yellow slippers approached the hero, adding that this was the name of the planet he had destroyed. The stranger came closer, saying that it was one of the most beautiful planets in the fourth universe. The man did not react to the hero's skeptical reaction, but added that it was his mother's favorite planet. John frowned as he looked at the stranger, and after a few seconds he asked who was in front of him. "Me?" the man asked mysteriously. He was silent for a few moments. Then he smiled broadly, and then, with a mad grin, he introduced himself as the creator. John was silent for a while, but he exhaled with a smile, not at all embarrassed by the expression on his interlocutor's face. "The creator is the creator," he replied, before asking if the man had seen a dark-haired girl there. To this, the stranger replied that there was no one else except the two of them, which amazed the hero. Here, John received a notification that there was only one player on the server, and the creator added that the guy killed everyone himself. And finally, it dawned on the hero. No one would have survived such a large-scale explosion. And when the man added that there was no one left alive, John chuckled. The stranger was taken aback, not understanding such a reaction, and the hero laughed uncontrollably. He exulted, "Revenge!" raising his club above his head. While the guy continued to rejoice, the stranger still stood in a stupor. John then turned to Urus, wanting to share with him the joy of the revenge that had been accomplished. But the stick in his hand showed no signs of life. The hero began to curse, trying to pull the dragon out. The stranger again spoke up, saying that there were only two of them. John looked at him and frowned. The man added that the animal was not with them either. The guy skeptically asked who was in front of him, if there was only one player on the server. The hero asked whether he was an NPS or a developer. The man began to answer that he was neither, but suddenly a blur appeared in his throat, and instead of a voice, a machine-like crackle was heard. The creator continued to speak through the crackling noise, and it was impossible to hear him. Then he sighed with a smile. As if nothing had happened, the man scratched the back of his head and said that there was already interference. Here, the space under the heroes began to disappear. John looked down in confusion. The man added that it was a shame to say goodbye so quickly, but it was nice to meet him. He then waved and asked me to say hello to someone named Furry. John opened his mouth in shock, trying to stop him. But at that moment, the space disappeared even more, blurring the stranger. Everything around disappeared under the bright light, and then the cells began to crumble and fall like shards of a mirror. The system's voice announced that the hero had been kicked out of the game. The wall of endless code appeared again. It was still quiet in the VR room. Only the hero's capsule showed signs of life. The door gradually began to open, filled with steam. With a distinctive click, the door opened completely. John took off his VR glasses. He was clearly very irritated. "Why did you even show up if you didn't say anything?" The guy was indignant. John continued to grumble, not noticing that there was a man sitting opposite him, surrounded by bodyguards. The man kept looking at John through his dark glasses and smoked an expensive cigar. Suddenly, he stood up, revealing an expensive white suit. The blonde walked towards John, followed by his bodyguard. Walking slowly forward, the man said the hero's exact age, name, and how much time he spent in the game. The guards stood like a wall when the stranger added that the guy's favorite weapon was a level 99 baton. As he checked to see if everything was correct, his massive figure loomed menacingly over John. The guy answered in the affirmative with a trembling voice and asked who was in front of him. The man slowly took off his sunglasses. And then, with a dangerous flash of his blue eyes, he replied that he was the one who had come for his club. John is a 21-year-old college student and a fan of the game Chrono Life. During his entire playing career, he never rose above the amateur level. But he was lucky and was able to upgrade a regular club to level 99+. Then he was able to take revenge on everyone he didn't like, and even to this sweet-looking lady. He dealt with her best of all. Along with it, the planet was also destroyed. Then someone appeared who called himself the creator. although he disappeared as suddenly as he came. Under the light of the moon and a canvas of stars in the sky, skyscrapers rise above the city, casting reflections from their windows onto the sidewalks. A small restaurant with a bright neon sign was guarded by men in formal dark gray suits with expensive cars parked around it. The description on the sign on the front stated that the establishment specialized in making rice soups. On the table made of warm light brown wood, there was a large black bowl, enveloped in the delicate aroma of soup with white sauce plates around the edges. Surrounded by menacing-looking men in formal suits, John and that same stranger sat at this table. Bringing another spoon to his mouth, the man ordered the hero to eat, noting that the owner of the restaurant was an old friend of his, and that she cooked just fine. The guy repeated after his interlocutor with a trembling hand while his whole body was trembling, and beads of sweat from tension and fear were gathering on his forehead. Suddenly, the blonde, as if not noticing John's anxiety, indulged in memories of how often he visited this establishment during his distant, poor youth. He added with a smile that it was about 15 years ago, and he founded the company when Chronolife was still in the development stage. At the man's last phrase, the hero was suddenly struck by a realization. A guess sparkled in his eyes. John, trying to formulate a clear answer, began to mumble and stutter, confused, while his interlocutor serenely enjoyed his food. Then the hero cried out that he thought of the man as a mafia leader, but he didn't even want to guess who the people around them were. But it turned out that they were employees. The developer of the hero models on the right, the sound engineer in the middle, and the head of the marketing department on the left. John admitted that, mistaking the developer for a mafioso, he almost fainted from fear, and then asked why he needed the hero. After listening to the screams, the man, continuing to eat his soup calmly, replied that he had already mentioned this earlier at the gaming club. The atmosphere suddenly became tense as he repeated that he had come for the boy's wooden club, as it was extremely valuable. John felt a bead of sweat roll down his cheek again, as he asked confusedly what that meant. The developer responded that it was perfectly normal for him to take buggy items from players, especially ones of this magnitude. John almost jumped out from behind the table, indignant that he personally upgraded his weapon without using anything from outside. But the guy stopped short when the man's voice suddenly became even more serious, and all his arguments were immediately blocked by the phrase, 3%. This was the probability of successful improvement after the 10th time, and with subsequent times it decreased more and more. The blonde pierced the hero with a direct gaze, firmly asking if he understood what this meant. John was perfectly aware of his interlocutor's words and then remained silent, looking away. Even if it wasn't a bug, the chances of getting a club at that level in such a short time are almost impossible. The hero continued to silently look at the table, not raising his gaze to the developer, feeling completely defeated. With a heavy sigh, the man finally said that, as the creator of the game, he would confiscate the club from the guy. The night sky, strewn with stars and flooded with the lights of the city's 24-hour signs, remained in a tense silence. Finally, a new day arrived, and the game location was illuminated by the scorching afternoon sun. It rose high above the picturesque green forest of the rocky and rocky front county. The calm was interrupted by the menacing roar of an animal with a huge, stinking mouth full of sharp, rotten teeth. The giant hairy mutant bull Gortys, level 21, flashed its small round eyes predatorily. Meanwhile, on the other side, a team of 4 players prepared for his furious attack, drawing their weapons. A beast of terrifying size rushed at them with great speed, its long and sharp horns raised. Suddenly, the fiery tip of a crystal weapon that looked like a large spear began to sparkle. One of the guild girls swung her flaming weapon, loudly chanting, "Firebolt!" Covering the entire space with red light, the girl shot a fireball at the monster. Gortys was instantly caught in a hot cage as his silhouette was slightly visible from behind the pillar of fire. His skin was quickly being burned alive and the beast roared uncontrollably, trying to break free, but it was too late. The guild leader rejoiced at their team's victory, praising the sorceress for her great efforts in the fight. Suddenly, with strange cries, another girl from the guild appeared on the battlefield preparing to attack. Continuing to scream, she got into a fighting stance, the bluish brass knuckles glinting in her fragile palm. The girl furiously rushed towards the almost defeated monster while he continued to scream, engulfed in flames. The team leader indignantly exclaimed that she should stop immediately and not do anything stupid. But at that moment, she no longer heard him, because she pounced on the beast from above, grabbing him by his massive horns. However, without hesitation, Gortys easily threw the stubborn woman back several meters, shaking his head from bottom to top. She flew head over heels, head first, straight towards the unsuspecting fire sorceress. The sorceress only managed to whisper, ouch, before the inevitable collision. The sound of one girl falling onto another was so loud that the rest of the guild members immediately perked up. The other players immediately ran up to help the girls, while John watched the spectacle from the heights of the treetops. He could hear their anxious cries perfectly well, but he clearly had no intention of doing anything about it. After a long period of silent observation, the guy once again sighed tiredly, wandering in his thoughts. "What should we do now?" the hero asked out loud, as if the mountains and trees around him could answer him. Behind him at this time, the serene chomping of the little animal could be heard. Urus sat behind his master, enjoying a chicken leg and asking what the guy was planning to do now. The hero did not answer, and his face was distorted with even greater sadness from the overwhelming sadness. John again gloomily ran his hand behind him, feeling for the weapon that was glittering in the sun. He looked at her sadly, reading the footnote of the hard-to-achieve level 99 status. The hero frowned again, unable to drive away the bad thoughts and memories of yesterday's conversation. The night and that cozy little restaurant came back to mind again. And at the same time, it was far from a cozy topic of conversation. The developer repeated his words that the hero's weapons are subject to confiscation. At this, John only clenched his teeth in frustration, his palms pressing harder into the table from the tension. Suddenly, the developer added that he had been instructed to say so by the company, and John's anger turned to confusion. The man, in response to a silent question, explained that he considered this rule unfair to the players. The hero asked again, incredulously and still slightly confused, if this was really so. To this, the blonde replied that he had conducted his own investigation and had concluded that the guy's club was not a bug at all. The man eventually thought about it and decided that he would not interfere in this and would leave the hero alone. Although he did not miss the opportunity to remind that John with a club managed to kill the strongest monster. Then, using the soul of this monster, wipe 3 million innocent users off the face of the planet in one fell swoop. And then, in exactly the same way, in an instant he didn't leave a single wet spot on her. But in fact, he had and has the right to freedom of action, because he is a user of this game. With these words, the developer poured the sauce from one plate into another filled with soup. John watched him silently and in amazement, not quite believing what he had just heard. And the developer said that the guy can even add spicy radish to his rice soup if that's his choice. John listened attentively to this motivational monologue with the same amazement. The man handed him the remains of the hot radish, and the boy hesitantly took the plate in his hands. For some reason, this moment seemed special to the hero, comfortable in its own way. And suddenly, the owner of the restaurant appeared, immediately hit the developer on the back of the head and shouted at him not to spoil the food, and John quietly put the radish aside. The woman turned around and walked back, grumbling that she had been cooking beef broth all night, and they were trying to ruin it. And on the menu, there was also a soup with spicy radish, especially for the developer. There was silence at the table for a few minutes while the man looked shamefacedly into his soup and the boy moved the ill-fated plate away. After finishing these memories, the hero looked again at his recaptured club. He frowned, keeping the phrase about spicy radish rice soup in his mind. Suddenly, another scream was heard from below the tree. All members of the team turned against a certain Kate, the same girl who attacked Gorless. The guild leader shouted that the girl didn't know how to work in a team and wondered why she had gotten into trouble at all, while the sorceress tried to calm him down. The hero listened as the leader continued to shout that they shouldn't have taken it at all. He suddenly remembered the developer's only request that starry evening. As the president of Chronolife, he didn't know if he had the right to say that, but the man sincerely believed that it was a good game. It had freedom, romance, and an open world. It had no equal among its analogs, according to the director, and so the man asked not to destroy this world, but simply to enjoy his stay in it. Once again, the guy went inside himself, thinking deeply about the director's words. At that moment, a sudden, sharp sound of spitting on someone's clothes was heard from below. The demonstrative spit landed right on Kate's neat scarf, and the team leader kicked her out of the guild, saying that they would no longer raid with her. The team members all turned around and walked away, and the leader continued to grumble that it was surprising how her weapon could be like his, with such poor skills. The system immediately notified that Kate was no longer a member of the guild from that time on. John continued to silently watch this picture without interest, thinking and grieving about his own. He sighed before asking rhetorical questions into the air again. Open world? Romance? John was sure that all this was complete nonsense, and the main principle of the game was survival of the strongest. The hero remembered the president's request to simply enjoy his time in the game. Yes, the guy wanted to take everything from life, but in the way he knew how. When he wanted the radish soup to be more contrasting, he simply added more radish. He pointed the club downwards again, with the obvious intention of maiming the retreating travelers. The blow was supposed to hit the fleeing guild players straight away, and so he took a pose and was ready to swing his club right at the target. But suddenly he slipped on a rock from a loud scream and barely managed to grab the club before it fell. The hero turned around at the overly loud sound of someone swearing. Kate screamed about how she hated this game, this world, and everything in the world. She grumbled loudly that people simply didn't understand good weapons and would regret kicking her out. And they themselves are to blame for not immediately taking her seriously. A professional with first-class attributes. The girl was almost crying, angry that she had spent a lot of gold on all these useless things. John's face was unreadable as he watched her endless tirade. He remembered how he had once repeated these same words almost exactly, while in the same position. The guy was moved by her words and now looked at Kate with interest and amazement. Immediately, his memory flashed back to how everyone had refused him and rejected any attempts to join. And again, something inside him responded to the girl's furious cries, especially the part with a lot of gold spent on pointless weapons. After some time, Kate continued to cry, reassuring herself that she did not need a team. She grumbled that she would still go on raids even if she was completely alone. And while the girl walked angrily through the forest, the hero did not take his eyes off her, watching from above. Suddenly, out of the corner of Kate's ear, she heard a characteristic animal roar. Right in front of her, Gortys appeared again, his whole appearance threatening to finish what had been started. And then it turned out that the beast was far from the only one there. The sudden sight of the girl's body instantly gripped her with a primitive animal fear. The beast's huge mouth was already slowly opening in anticipation of a hearty meal. And a moment later, a general angry roar was heard from the monsters huddled together. Their red eyes, filled with animal fury, sparkled in the daylight. Without delay, the animals began to run towards the girl, drooling along the way and not forgetting to growl loudly. They approached her in an instant, and she was still in a stupor of fear. Kate closed her eyes, covering her ears with her hands and mentally preparing for imminent death. At that moment, John fearlessly jumped towards the monsters, covering her frightened form with himself. Already preparing the club for battle, the guy tried to answer the question for himself. Why did he do it? Then he swung his wooden weapon and struck the huge pile of monsters from the bottom up. This blow was strong enough to pierce this planet too. And in just a second, all that was left of the monsters was a breath of wind, and the unsuspecting Kate was hiding behind his back. She was still squinting, preparing herself for death from such a huge gathering of terrifying monsters. But when she didn't feel any pain, she still managed to force herself to open one eye. She looked up automatically and was amazed at the picture that appeared before her. A deep, bright funnel of snow-white clouds formed in the clear blue sky. The hero turned to face her, blown by the light wind after the explosion, with a slight aura of heroism. With a sparkling smile, John greeted the girl in a deliberately charming manner. He felt like a hero, even though he was wearing only a dark blue cloak that barely covered his legs. Kate's mouth opened in surprise, blushing slightly, either from the fear she had just experienced or from her raging heart. She herself was wearing a blue suit with a miniskirt and long boots that hugged her slender legs. The prologue to the hero's story was a fateful proposal under a sparkling sky. "Hey, do you want to join my team?" But the girl's sharp refusal, coupled with a middle finger, interrupted such a fateful moment. After that, she immediately turned around and walked away with lightning speed, not giving a chance for objection. The hero was left behind in confusion, thinking that this was obviously not the most pleasant beginning. Meanwhile, in the real world, the situation was not so calm. People were actively discussing something with each other and carefully monitoring social networks. They did it everywhere, at school, at home, on the way to work, or during lunch at their institution. Some people, out of curiosity, looked for information right in bed before going to sleep. Information about the incident that immediately attracted the attention of the world community. And the name of this event is Judgment Day, which, judging by the name, promised the inevitable end of the world. Gamers all over the world discussed this high-profile incident day and night from almost every iron. Everyone was interested in a certain god of war, or master of killing, who committed 2 waves of genocide, one greater than the other. When he was called the strongest in Chrono Life, there were those who were indignant about it all. Some people thought he was just going around the system and using a cheat, and that was pretty close to the truth. Someone said that since 3 million players couldn't defeat him during the second wave, it means he really is the strongest of them. Many agreed, because even with a pumped-up character, it is impossible to defeat such a large number of people. They were all united by only one thing, a huge desire to get rid of the cheater in the game. People actively wrote in support of the game to investigate this matter, and they were delighted when Chrono Life finally responded. And what was the players' bewilderment when the developers responded that, after the investigation, no cheats or bugs were found in the God of Death. Everyone around was surprised by this, but they could do nothing, so they put an end to the issue. The game continued as if nothing had happened, and even this event was almost ignored. Although rumors among the characters could not simply stop. Rumors said that the game server was taken down due to the actions of that very user. People suspected that it was all about the number of the hero's victims who were defeated with one blow. His photographs with the caption "Wanted" were posted all over the streets. But because of the hood, it was difficult to recognize his face. And in the photograph, John really did look quite dangerous. In reality, he was smiling relaxedly from ear to ear. The guy followed Kate at a distance of less than a meter, lazily throwing his arms at the elbows behind his head. It was obvious that his companion was extremely irritated by this rather than pleased. But the hero did not pay any attention to this and continued walking, moving even closer. At some point, the girl couldn't stand it any longer and turned to him, reasonably asking why he was following her. To this, John responded in a relaxed manner that the two of them should already be at the roadstead. The girl screamed that she had not agreed to this, and anyway, she would never go anywhere with such a poor exhibitionist as he. The guy asked again why he was an exhibitionist, to which Kate shouted that he wore only his underwear under his coat. When she added that he also fights with a level 1 stick, John was already standing there, covering himself, clearly offended, and she turned around again and left, repeating that she had no dealings with newcomers. When the girl moved away, John was indignant at why she was calling him names, considering that he had actually saved her from the monsters. Urus, who appeared next to the hero, replied that when his master was killing monsters, she closed her eyes in fear and saw nothing. Memories of that moment and the cowering girl came flooding back to John's mind, and so he guessed that she definitely hadn't seen anything. The guy concluded that the girl apparently didn't understand how strong he really was. While the stranger was leaving, seething with anger, the hero continued to watch her from afar. John was glad when he realized how lucky he was that she was so timid, because he had to hide his strength. Here he quickly ran up to the girl, affectionately calling her little sister. With a stupid smile, the hero babbled in the most sincere plea to her. "Teach me, please." Little sister turned to him and raised an eyebrow skeptically in response. John replied that he had only recently started playing and asked her to teach him, addressing her as a teacher with all due respect. The girl's face immediately changed. She seemed to glow with pride, surrounded by an aura of joy. Her cheeks instantly turned bright red and her eyes sparkled with hope again. She remembered the recent spit from the guild leader, which landed right on her collar, and the terrible attitude of the others. This character rejected her as unceremoniously as the others, although the girl had great potential. A stupid, happy smile touched her lips at the thought that she was now not just a member of some team, but a sensei. At this time, the animal asked what John was doing, and he replied that he was pretending to be a newbie in order to appear weak. The little animal immediately remembered the loser's strategy that they had already discussed at some point. But he was not allowed to finish by another sudden, but this time, enthusiastic squeal from the girl. She threw her hair back with a sparkling smile, saying that she was embarrassed at first, but as a sensei, she was ready to teach him. And the system's voice immediately announced that the character Love had invited John to his team. Smiling smugly, Love added that she could teach him a lesson just once. The guy was given her full information, and it turned out that she was a level 24 hand-to-hand combat master with good characteristics. After some time, the heroes found themselves in the first cave before the city of Front, hidden in its vicinity. From the cave came the sounds of blows and an incessant animal roar. Kate struck a pose and readied her brass knuckles. She easily hit one of the mutants while the others jumped back in fear. This roaring beast was a huge club-footed monster, a cross between a bear and a level 4 hare. After her blow, the monster fell on its back, no longer showing any signs of life. Suddenly, another bear hare appeared behind the girl, ready to attack for his fellow. He pierced the ground with his large paws, but at that moment Kate had already jumped up using her skills. She exhaled, calming the adrenaline that had risen in her blood and thinking about her next steps. With a quick somersault, the girl jumped away from the monsters crowding in one place, and then the girl extended her leg in a complex move, preparing to deliver a powerful blow. With a cry of, "Kick of the diving dragon," she struck the next beast with that very dragon. The hares gradually realized that something was wrong with them in their fight with the girl. They immediately ran up to another lifeless body, becoming even more angry at what they saw. Kate assumed a fighting stance, well prepared to defend and attack these monsters. "Attack me! I'm sensei now!" she sincerely rejoiced, throwing them aside with her bare hands. At this time, John sat quietly in the corner with Eurus, hiding in the recesses of the cave. They both noticed that the girl really had excellent skills in fighting such monsters. But the hero said that even if the enemy is weak, you shouldn't let yourself be surrounded, while Kate continued to deal with the monsters with her bare hands. To this, Eurus objected that she simply had good, expensive equipment. The little beast explained that her brass knuckles cost 10 million gold, and the hero noted in shock that this number was equal to real money. All the other equipment was also expensive and totaled around 100 million gold. When the hero asked where the girl got her expensive clothes, Eurus replied, "Obviously, pay to win." John raised his eyebrows in surprise, as if asking a silent question. He remembered Kate screaming about how unfair the players were to her, how she cried, indignant that she had good equipment, and they didn't understand anything. Apparently, she really spent a lot on all of this. John now understood what was going on and wondered why he had to spend 100 million won on gold. Suddenly, Kate pulled him out of his thoughts by calling out loudly. The girl was outraged that the hero did nothing while she was fighting, and so she ordered him to start working with the club. John asked a little tensely whether he should really work with this stick, to which Kate shouted that if the guy wanted to level up even a little, he needed to fight. The girl continued to grumble that this was no way to behave in battle, and the beast appeared behind her again. The hero gave the monster a subtle slap while she was saying he wasn't doing anything. The hair exploded, and Kate continued to mumble without noticing. When only a light breath of wind remained from the beast, the girl turned around. "It's weird, where does the wind come from in the cave?" she asked, while John mentally scolded himself, realizing that the concept of a loser with superpowers was no longer so appealing to him. Suddenly, Kate received a message. Some user wrote that something was starting in 10 minutes and ordered to exit the game. The girl immediately frowned. She obviously didn't like this arrangement. Then she sighed heavily, showing displeasure, but did not say why exactly. Kate turned to the hero and announced that she needed to go out for a while, but later promised to join him. The guy didn't have time to get a word in before the girl disappeared, babbling that she would be there in half an hour, and for now, let John practice. The hero muttered in surprise that she had run away, and Eurus nodded with equal surprise. John wondered who the girl really was to be able to spend 100 million on gold. The pet replied that she was probably born with a gold spoon in her mouth. Thus, the action from the game location was transferred to an evening city in the real world. Inside the building was a hotel with many rooms in a solid beige color scheme. In one of them, on a large, wide, soft bed, lay a girl in pajamas and VR glasses. The system immediately notified her that she was no longer in the game. The girl took off her VR glasses and slightly rose from the warm, comfortable bed. Under the gaming equipment were others. Neat round glasses with red frames. She sighed heavily, lazily looking at her gaming equipment in her hands. The girl went deep into herself, thinking about the past events that had passed so quickly. She remembered the strange newcomer who stubbornly followed her like a little tail, his stupid smile and equally stupid request that she couldn't ignore. And at first the girl was indeed extremely skeptical, but now a slight satisfied half-smile blossomed on her lips. Suddenly, a stranger in a formal suit burst into her room screaming. She was outraged that Kate had not yet taken off her VR glasses and asked if she really wanted to lose her job. The girl shouted back that she had already filmed everything, and the woman called her a gambling addict. She then pointed to a chair and ordered Kate to sit on it, as they only had 10 minutes. But then the woman shouted that her charge had put the VR glasses on over her regular ones again, and the glasses had left dents on her nose again. The girl justified herself by saying she would have a panic attack if she took them off, but the woman would still hide the marks on her nose with makeup. The makeup artist frowned but didn't respond, continuing to stare at her charge. She sighed and grumbled for Kate to sit down already since they didn't have much time. Then she continued to mumble that if it weren't for the size of her salary, she would have already killed both her and herself. The wooden table was covered with a variety of different types of solid cosmetics. The woman carefully removed the red glasses from Kate's neat nose. Although they looked rather inconspicuous on the face, they actually looked expensive. The makeup artist used a trendy glossy powder with the brand engraved on it. She then painted the outline of her charge's lips with a neat brush, dipping it into the lipstick. After completing her makeup, Kate rose from her chair and let down her pink hair, and her long, thick locks of hair in a sparkling style now fell down her back. After some time, the bright light of the bluish spotlights blinded with its flashes from above. The host's voice announced the closing of the festival, which was taking place in that very room. The crowd applauded when they heard that the last act to perform would be the girl who had been #1 in the charts for 13 weeks. The outline of a wooden guitar glittered on the screens as the girl with the title of Best Voice in the World approached the stage. She folded her hands into a heart shape, signaling to the audience the song she would be performing. She looked like a doll, smiling brightly in her neat dress and holding her guitar. The heroine's real name is Sarah, and her real human status is singer and composer. However, despite her universal popularity, no one knew about her true love for video games. At the same time, the sound of massive animal attacks could be heard from afar in the cave. The clawed paws of another monster were approaching John. He chuckled that it was indeed worth practicing a little while Sensei was out of the game. Eurus asked in confusion what his master had in mind, having noticed that the animals were already so close. At this, the guy's grin grew into a wide grin, and he replied that he needed practice in hiding his superpower. The monsters roared at the same time, once again gathering into a huge pile. And John, looking around the assembled crowd, added that he must learn to strike without killing. The shining blow of the club pierced this planet through and through for the second time. At this time, a certain creator from the white space watched what was happening with a grin. "Interesting practice," the man said mysteriously, lazily levitating in space. Looking at the bright flash from the shockwave, the blonde suddenly added that he himself would try something like that. Sarah is 17 in real life and a second grader at a good high school. She came to music school when she was still a little girl and at first did not achieve much success. But now, after mountains of training and sleepless nights, she was being called the best idol and singer-songwriter. During another interview, the host congratulated the girl on holding first place for 14 weeks, and she modestly thanked him. The interviewer praised the lyrics of her song, The Story of the Little Mermaid, and asked how she manages to write such touching lyrics. Sarah, with a charming smile, replied that she loved to sit at home alone, read poetry collections, and just fairy tales. The guy exclaimed that thanks to the interest in fairy tales, it was clear why the story was about the Little Mermaid, and the girl was embarrassed because the manager asked her not to talk about it. Sarah admitted that she actually feels very awkward about having such childish hobbies at such a young age. Her revelation touched the presenter so much that he blushed deeply and opened his mouth in a pleasant stupor. Although he wasn't the only one who was touched by this picture, everyone who was behind the scenes also blushed. Finally, the guy objected that there was nothing shameful about reading fairy tales, and Sarah thanked him. The manager watched all this from the TV screen. The woman drank her black tea gracefully, holding the mug according to all the rules of table etiquette. But in reality, she was outraged by how easily the cunning girl could deceive the entire country. "Poetry? Fairy tales? Nonsense," she muttered under her breath, crossing one leg over the other. Many people didn't actually know about Sarah's true passion, her passion for video games. Meanwhile, the interviewer took the opportunity to ask the girl about her experience acting in the drama. When the guy clarified that it was the role of a foul-mouthed high school student, Sarah smiled faintly. The girl replied that for her sensitive nature, it was a truly difficult role. With the most honest smile, she added that she had never sworn in her life. However, already in the game when she first appeared back, Kate scolded John with the middle finger. The girl kicked the hero, screaming that he was greeting his boss in an extremely inappropriate manner. John asked, momentarily put off, since when had she become his boss? "Now!" Kate hissed, her expression fiercest, and she began to kick and beat him again, asking, does he really have any objections and does he not want to study? Sarah was one of those who relieved stress by playing, and while John was her punching bag, Eurus wondered why the owner tolerated this rude woman. The hero quietly answered the little animal, defending himself, that he had to hide his strength and pretend to be weak. Soon Kate began to line the guy up at attention, forcing him to shout, "Boss love!" Eurus heard her urging him to scream louder, and with a stony face he understood that his master's idea had worked. And so, another short period of time in the game has passed. John and Kate walked slowly into the mysterious, gloomy cave, which now seemed empty. Here the girl decided to ask the hero how long he had been training and fighting monsters, to which the guy sighed heavily. With a face full of pain, he replied that his journey was far from over and that it required incredible patience from him. Eurus, on the other hand, scoffed that the master's fight and don't kill tactics were bad, but John shut him up. Kate laughed and said she couldn't wait to finally see the guy fight the beasts. Then she suddenly realized that she didn't know the name of her student at all, and, having called him Panties, she nevertheless clarified his real nickname. John started to speak and almost said his nickname, but Kate interrupted him again. She said that Panties suited her just fine, while John felt he had been labeled. The girl giggled. The guy sighed sadly, asking why she needed his nickname at all, and someone was watching them from behind. A crowd of people in cloaks and one bearded, red-eyed man at the head, who were clearly hostile. The mysterious, dangerous man quietly whispered under his breath. "So I finally found her." And the heroes argued as if nothing had happened, not paying any attention to the crowd. One of the players in a cloak approached the main one, asking what they should do. The man, without taking his eyes off the couple, replied that he should gather all the guild members in this dungeon. His voice echoed softly off the walls of the cave as the leader added that their justice would be meted out today. On the other side of the cave, another hare was already roaring. His health was at 100% when the beast quickly approached the heroes. Kate ordered John to attack, and the boy, jumping out on all fours shouting "Panties!" rushed at the animal. The guy, on the command of the boss, quickly found himself opposite the irritated monster. The hero screamed loudly at the top of his lungs as if in a voice not his own, attracting the beast to himself. The beast immediately picked up the cry and roared in unison with the boy as his rage grew. Then the hero got tired of straining his throat and ran out of breath, and with that, his cry died down. The guy started shaking all over, pretending that he could barely hold his weapon in his hands. The beast looked skeptically at the raised club and at the hero. The stick approached the bare hare's fur in 1 second. A little more movement, and the club barely touched a small hair on the monster's fur. The contact caused blood to spurt from the beast's mouth and eyes, and its skull to split open from the inside. Now the beast could only open his eyes wide in pain and shock, feeling the blood dripping from his head. The monster then fell dead to the ground next to John. His health points were almost at 0, but the beast was still alive. In pleasant surprise, the hero exclaimed under his breath, "Oh!" examining the animal's body. So the mission, Fight Without Killing, was successfully completed for John, and Kate exclaimed with delight that the hero had made good progress, since he had killed the animal with 1 blow, while Urus rolled his eyes and the beast begged to finish him off. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a spear appeared and flew towards them. Kate immediately noticed movement out of the corner of her eye, and so she acted immediately. She grabbed the hero's cloak collar sharply, considering her next move. The girl then threw John to the ground, simultaneously kicking the spear in the opposite direction. Like a boomerang, the weapon fell back into the old man's calloused old hands. After this, the villain's grin widened even more. He admired Kate's abilities, but then assumed it was all because of her equipment. And the girl, still holding the hero's collar tightly, choking him, asked who they all were. The laughing man was surrounded from behind by his allies. "Have you forgotten my voice?" mocked the head of the Halasan Volcano Guild, Mr. Kim. Next to him stood the bald Mr. Lee, Mr. Joe with a rich mustache, and Mr. Ben in a mask. On the other side stood Mr. Isaac with an eye patch and Mr. O with bright red hair. "You're from the Halasan Guild," the girl finally exclaimed, realizing who was in front of her. "Long time no see," Mr. Kim retorted mockingly. The man then pointed his finger at the heroes, asking what they were planning to do. Kate asked the hero to hide behind her, because the situation had become really dangerous, and she herself was already getting ready for the fight, getting into a fighting stance and preparing her brass knuckles. A crowd of armed robbers attacked a fragile-looking girl. The guild members drew their sharp blades and swords, gradually surrounding her. But Kate looked forward with determination and without a trace of fear. She swung her leg, preparing to deliver her powerful blow. Using a complex combat technique, the girl kicked the closest opponent in the jaw with 1 blow. The blow caused the man's face to twist in pain and a tooth to fall out of his mouth. But Kate didn't stop. With her other leg, she twisted his neck. And then she jumped up, twisting in the air like a yo-yo. Kate screamed in fury, planning another blow. Using the dragon technique, the girl threw back almost all of the bandits in 1 fell swoop. People were screaming, fighting, groaning in pain. And John and Urus were sitting separately again. Watching the process, both agreed that they had absolutely no idea what was going on. The guy tried to guess the situation. He said that perhaps the guild boys were trying to get even with love and avenge their previous losses. When he added that the chief didn't know when to finish, the old man was already standing next to the unfamiliar girl. John concluded that he was probably right, continuing to watch as the men's bodies just flew away from Kate's magical kicks. The boy and the little animal laughed at the weakness of the 20-level thugs, who had started a useless fight in which the girl defeated them. The screaming and grunting continued in the background as Mr. Kim and a certain girl watched. The old man confirmed with a grin that everything was going according to plan and ordered the stranger to act. And she had already disappeared, leaving behind a wide, huge column of dust. A moment later, the stranger appeared behind Kate, but the heroine noticed her out of the corner of her eye. The brunette flashed her long, raking claws. Kate looked at her bare arms and assumed that the stranger was from the fighting class. "Theft?" The enemy cast the spell with a predatory, victorious grin. Her palms were illuminated with a golden light from the thief's magic, illuminating the entire cave. The glow blinded Kate for a second, causing her to instinctively cover her face with her hands. A few seconds later, the girl immediately looked down at her palms in shock. However, it was now too late. The brass knuckles were no longer on her hands. "My God, what a wonderful weapon!" exclaimed the thief, who now appeared behind the girl. The brunette noticed that Kate was clearly born with a silver spoon in her mouth, since the brass knuckles of silence cost almost 11,000 gold pieces. John asked in shock what kind of skill it was, to which Urus replied sullenly, "Stealing a thief's class." The little animal was clearly embarrassed by something. He muttered that this shouldn't be the case. To this, John responded in a relaxed manner that he had nothing to fear, since he only had his underpants and a cloak. There was a moment of awkward silence as the boy's words slowly sank in. Gradually, the realization came that a few centimeters away from the hero lay his most powerful weapon in the world. And then he turned to the club, realizing that this was the perfect target for the thief. The smile immediately turned into a strained and much more tense one. The hero suddenly jumped up from his place, which immediately attracted the attention of both girls while they were in the epicenter of the battle. Screaming, he grabbed the stick tightly in his hands and ran as far away from the thief as possible. Mr. Kim told the mercenary that she didn't have to touch the guy. There was nothing to steal anyway. However, the brunette did not answer immediately, but instead paused mysteriously. At this time, John moved further and further away, nervously gripping the club in his trembling fingers. The brunette suddenly perked up, blushing strangely and grinning broadly, almost crazy. She immediately threw the brass knuckles towards the old man, having found a more interesting target for herself. The girl finally replied that he couldn't understand her animalistic thieving instincts. "Stealing from a beggar is even more fun," the mercenary exclaimed enthusiastically, her cheeks still flushed. And in an instant, she found herself opposite the stunned hero, preparing to commit her favorite crime. "Hello, dear," the girl smiled broadly, already preparing her nimble fingers for action. Blushing with lust and anticipation, she asked where John was going in such a hurry. The thief extended her greedy hand towards him, and the hero only clutched the club tighter. John thought hastily that now was clearly not the time to hide his power from Kate, no matter how much he wanted to. His heart pounded loudly in his chest, and his hand was gripped in a death grip on the wood of his weapon. "Die!" the hero screamed furiously, swinging his club towards the girl. The entire area around the hero's blow was hidden behind a thick layer of dust and dirt. Kate and the Hallison Guild members stood frozen in place, watching what was happening. Urus was also clearly surprised by this turn of events and could only watch from afar. The silhouette of the guy finally began to become slightly visible from the thick fog of dust. Only the wooden club was no longer in his hand. And the completely unharmed mercenary stood opposite, calmly waving his weapon. Her sly, victorious smile framed her lips and revealed her neat fangs. Grinning happily and admiringly, she said that this club was now rightfully hers. The horror that flashed across John's face was beyond words. Without hiding her pleasure, the thief added that she would also steal his cloak, leaving him in his underwear. But a sudden rustle forced her to interrupt her monologue, full of confidence in her own superiority. The girl turned around, wondering what had just happened. And then she saw a furious, two-headed monster looking down at her. "How dare you touch me without knowing who I am?" Urus roared, his huge eyes flashing. The mercenary's eyes widened in fear, and her body seemed to freeze in place. She finally recoiled in fright, screaming and falling to the ground, the club falling from her hands. The weapon landed right under the feet of its rightful owner. John just looked down at him for a few seconds, not reacting in any way. Then he finally raised the club into his hand, gripping it tightly in his palm. At that moment, the system notified that Urus refused to surrender to the enemy, and therefore John was now officially the owner of the weapon. "It's just ridiculous," the little animal said sweetly, slipping out of the tree. He grumbled that his master was only John, and in general, how dare this thief even attempt to attack him? Urus was so angry that he even turned red, continuing to curse under his breath. Suddenly, a warm palm gently stroked his woolen head. Urus blushed, not expecting such tenderness from his master, but the hero did not look at him. His gaze was fixed on the heavily breathing brunette still lying in that place. She was trembling all over and pressed herself fearfully into the ground beneath her, unable to utter anything other than interjections. The girl could not understand what had just appeared before her eyes for a split second. It was something mythical, but at the same time too realistic for a ghost. Suddenly, Mr. Kim reminded everyone of himself and joined the conversation, forcing the girl to remember her original job. The thief immediately stood up, answering that she was, in fact, a professional mercenary, hired for money. A shrill female scream suddenly came from her left, distracting her attention from the mission. Kate kicked the ground out from under the brunette's feet, leaving her lying down again. "Give me back my weapon right now!" the heroine hissed furiously, ready to tear and throw. A smile blossomed on the mercenary's face again as she replied that she was indeed scared by such a furious attack. But Kate's weapon, according to the thief, was already in the hands of the leader of the Hallison Guild. And it was indeed so. The brass knuckles flashed enticingly in Mr. Kim's calloused hands. The girl clenched her teeth in anger and was about to rush at the guild members and take back the weapon. Suddenly, she slowly leaned forward onto the ground, unable to finish her obscene threats. After she slowly rolled down, a wooden club became visible behind her back. And so, Kate finally fell down in a knockout, while the hero, seemingly unperturbed, stood behind her with a club in the air. "Skill, fight without killing," the guy said quietly, repeating it once again like a mantra. The mercenary asked, confused, if he was on the same team as Kate. To this, John replied that he hid his power for many reasons. The thief asked what he was talking about when a blow from a club behind her sent the guild members flying in different directions. The explosion left only dust and bodies scattered throughout the cave. The brunette looked around in surprise, observing the terrifying picture. Kate's brass knuckles gleamed neatly next to the lifeless guild members. The thief turned to the hero again, asking if he had done it by accident, to which the hero unceremoniously hit her on the back of the head with a stick. "Yes, I am," the guy's eyes flashed murderously. The mercenary's health points instantly approached zero, just short of reaching complete zero. The hero once again used his favorite skill, fight without killing. While the girl was crawling exhausted, John hissed that he had gone through a lot of bad things to become stronger psychologically. He instinctively tightened his grip on the wooden club in his hand, and he added that because of her he almost had a heart attack. Then the edge of the stick touched the back of the thief's head again, and this time, a golden glow was visible from afar from the cave. Meanwhile, Kate found herself somewhere outside, sleeping peacefully on the grass. She gradually began to wake up, sleepily muttering something under her breath. Suddenly, the girl jumped into a fighting pose, practically waking up. John sat relaxed behind the tree next to her, asking if she was already awake. "Panties?" the girl asked again, searching for him with her eyes. The guy was calmly chewing a chicken leg, sitting leisurely behind a large tree. Kate asked where they both were and where the guild members had gone, to which John replied that the bandits had already left and the heroes were in a field near the dungeon. The girl was puzzled as to how they could just leave and tried to understand how she had fainted. However, the guy refused to answer her questions and simply ignored them. Instead, he threw the blue brass knuckles right into her hands. Now the weapon is back in the hands of its rightful owner. A little surprised and touched by this gesture, Kate looked at her own palms. Suddenly, John stood up and approached her, asking, "Was that the Hallison Guild?" He continued asking what they were doing, who they were, and what they were doing in general. Kate suddenly blushed deeply, feeling his heroic aura, before she had time to think about an answer. But then she grabbed the student by the cheek, asking why he decided to play tough. And yet, a slight blush remained on her cheeks as she exhaled with relief. "Okay, I'll tell you, since you got involved in all this because of me," Kate answered, turning away. Turning to him, Kate asked if the hero had heard anything about P2W. The guy was taken aback at first, but then reasonably asked what it was. "Pay to win. They use it in games," Eurus immediately answered the guy. John was surprised that a simple NPC like him even knew about such a thing. The little animal added with a selfless smile that he had read about this term on NamiWiki. The dragon launched into a huge and insanely long tirade about what the term meant, but his long monologue was interrupted by Kate. "P2W is about people who spend billions on games," she said, as if cutting off the answer. And so it dawned on the guy that the people from the guild were P2W players, and Kate confirmed it. The girl said that she had accidentally bought her knuckle dusters at an auction a few months ago, and then the Hallison Guild began to pursue her in order to take the weapon away. However, she immediately laughed that they were actually just old swindlers with terrible skills, so she always won against them, and the hero joined in the chuckle. But Kate couldn't help but be surprised at how the guy was able to return her brass knuckles, and John frantically began to think about how to justify himself. Well, they just forgot about them and ran away. "Yes, that's how it happened," the hero mumbled uncertainly, which didn't convince her at all. Having resigned herself, the girl sighed and said that the robbers would return in any case, because the old man's obsession had already crossed all boundaries. John asked what was so special about her brass knuckles that attracted them. "Obviously because they cost 10 million won," Kate replied. But the hero found it strange that old men who spent billions on the game were obsessed with brass knuckles that cost only 10 million won. When John said this, a thought seemed to strike Kate. "That's definitely not the reason," the hero summed up his words. The night sky, strewn with stars, was illuminated by a crescent moon. Hidden in the shadows behind the treetops was the modest-looking shelter of the Hallison Guild. A sudden, sharp blow inside the estate was accompanied by blood appearing on the body. Mr. Kim was slashed across the stomach, and he wheezed in horror and unbearable pain. The old man immediately fell backwards in front of a certain man in a royal robe. The robber, almost crying, begged his master on his knees to forgive him. The grandfather begged his master to give him another chance. But a menacing-looking man shut him up and called the guild members useless trash. The man added that they had no more time, which meant he would hand over this mission to the 4 divine kings. Mr. Kim's gaze automatically followed the indicated direction. The footsteps of those same divine kings were heard, and one of them asked why the man in the robe was keeping the old man. Then another added that he had already dealt with 3 matters on his own. The interlocutors saw 3 silhouettes of players in rich clothes. The second of the 4 divine kings, whose capital was 1.7 billion, mockingly asked how a guy with only 100 million gold could be in a guild with them. The third on the list, with 1.2 billion, chuckled that this was precisely why they had long wanted to kick the old man out. But their master was too kind. The richest of them, the first divine king with a capital of 2.1 billion, remained silent, crossing his arms over his chest. The second king suddenly leaned closer to Mr. Kim with a crooked smile. "He hired a mercenary, that's why he failed," the man shamelessly mocked him. And the old man remembered the thief and realized that, it turns out, he had been watched all this time. Suddenly, the first king spoke up and said that he himself would take up the previously failed task. He demonstratively straightened his soft red hair, flashing the expensive rings on his fingers. He could easily take the knuckles of silence or any other weapon in half a day. Suddenly, the gentleman in the robe spoke up and chuckled loudly and ominously. Immediately, his laughter turned into uncontrollable, terrible laughter. "Okay," Mr. King finally answered, "and also the real head of the Hallison Guild, whose capital is 12 billion. Filled with a halo of self-importance, the leader ordered the first king to show the true horror of the Hallison Guild. Guildmaster Hallison continued to grin widely, enjoying the moment. At the same time, the fox's eyes flashed decisively, already ready to begin his operation. The third king, who was also an elf, licked his lips in anticipation of an interesting mass battle. And the second king grinned villainously, impatient to arrange a bloody fireworks display. But the pathos of the moment and Mr. King's speech was spoiled by John, who was casually picking his nose. The whole company turned to the unperturbed guy in awkward silence. A moment of silence was followed by a general lack of understanding of where he even came from. And suddenly John burst out laughing, still not removing his dirty finger from his nose. The hero continued to laugh while Mr. King and the kings looked on in confusion. "Who are you, and where did you come from?" the leader of the Hallison Guild asked angrily, looking at the guy with a distrustful gaze. "Try to guess yourself," John answered relaxedly, continuing to pick his nose. Then the guy shook the booger off his finger somewhere in a downward direction. "It'll be hard to hide my power from Boss Love if you keep pestering her. It was hard for me last time too," he said, wiping his finger on Urus, who was silently cursing his master. "4 divine kings? Ha!" John exclaimed, grinning triumphantly. The hero mockingly suggested not to drag it out and end it right here and now. In response to this, Mr. King let out a heavy, almost tired sigh. The man said with shining eyes that John was just a crazy boy who stuck his nose where it didn't belong. Before he could give the order to deal with the guy, all 4 kings rushed into battle. The second and third divine kings from Hallison decided to attack first. They instantly approached the hero, who did not move a single muscle on his face during this time. Only a smug grin from ear to ear adorned his lips. The guy already habitually swung his powerful wooden club, directing it downwards. The golden strike pierced through all the opponents in one short moment. Both screamed loudly and doubled over in intense agony from unbearable pain. Although at the same time, from the street outside, everything inside the house seemed quite calm. There was a small forest around the guild's hideout with beautiful blue flower clusters all around. Not far away, the soft sound of familiar, neat coral heels was heard. The silhouette with the staff gradually moved forward, humming a simple, cheerful song. At this time, the strongest one, the first king, decided to attack, already having prepared his long claws. The girl walked forward, continuing to sing, while her black skirt fluttered in the wind in time with her steps. Fox was also pierced by a blow from the club right in the stomach, causing him to double over and fly back. The first of the 4 divine kings coughed up blood, his eyes rolling back in pain. And the girl outside kept walking and humming, her shiny jewelry and pink hair shining in the moonlight. John grinned widely and madly as he dealt precise blow after blow to his enemies. The long strands of my friend's hair fluttered in the wind along with a light, cheerful song. Suddenly the house split in half, breaking through the roof and destroying everything inside. The girl noticed this out of the corner of her eye and shuddered in surprise. However, she soon opened her mouth again, intending to continue singing simply. But she decided not to continue and finally closed her plump lips. Lilith, in all her glory, was now alive and perfectly healthy, just 1 level below the goddess of life. "Oh my God!" she exclaimed with a slight half-smile, almost in admiration, anticipating an interesting spectacle. Mr. King furiously commanded all members of the Halasan Guild to attack. The bandits with predatory grins began to surround the hero from all sides. John just sighed boredly, until the calm and semblance of a smile did not leave his face. The wooden club lay in his hand, tightly gripped in a death grip. The guy remembered the time when he was surrounded by 3 million people in exactly the same way. But if the Halasan Guild wanted to destroy the hero, they needed to gather at least that many players. Having said this, the guy once again grinned and waved his weapon. The wind from the impact cut through the air like a boomerang. It landed on the nearest bandit, instantly shattering his jaw. A bright flash from the explosion captured a guild member flying several meters away. But the guy didn't stop there. A bloodthirsty flash appeared in his eyes as he prepared to strike again. A bright golden light engulfed the space where the club had passed like a halo. People, like little flies from a fly swatter, flew away from the place where the weapon touched. The shockwave's vortex reached a large area around itself. Mr. King watched in silence as his men suffered and cried out in agony. He was horrified, sweating from excitement, and the realization that now the entire guild would be destroyed. Suddenly, Mr. Kim, still lying in the very spot where he had been struck, addressed him. The old man asked the gentleman to run before it was too late. At this, the leader Halasan gritted his teeth, but was unable to utter a word of refutation. The man silently thought about the fact that, apart from Mr. Kim and his subordinates, all the other members of the guild were donators. Looking at the lifeless bodies, he remembered that here the weakest newcomers spent at least 10 million. And even the top 5 guilds could not look down on Halasan. But now Mr. King was sweating more and more from tension and fear. Looking at the blazing blows, the man wondered who John was and how he could so easily deal with any of the guild members. A sudden realization came to the man, and he opened his mouth in shock. "Don't tell me that this is..." Mr. King muttered to himself, becoming even more nervous. "This is the same unknown person about whom there were so many rumors," he guessed. The guild leader examined the hero from behind, becoming increasingly convinced of his outward resemblance to the poster. He remembered the key words that were used to describe a certain killer of an entire continent. And suddenly the man delved into his own memories he started playing in the 2nd grade. The games were much simpler than today, but leveling up was more difficult without quests and raids. Even so, the 9-year-old boy had a lot of fun. His parents scolded him when he spent the whole night playing games, although the man fondly remembered the days when he spent all weekends leveling up his characters with his online friends. But years passed, Mr. King grew up and was no longer that naive boy. Because of his new responsibilities, he no longer had time even for such important things as memories. He came to his senses while sitting in his presidential office, when he was already well over 40. Mr. King sat in his richly furnished apartment, surrounded by an atmosphere of influence and wealth. His state-of-the-art equipment gleamed under the office lamp. Suddenly, his subordinate burst into the office, holding an old white monitor in his hands. Mr. Kim exclaimed with a satisfied smile that he had finally found that very computer. For his hard work, Mr. King wanted to give himself something special: memories. When the old man asked if the boss really wanted to play on an old antique, the man replied that he was a fool and that this computer was recreating the atmosphere. Finally, the director's fingers pressed against the mouse, and his heart began to pound as if he had gone back in time. At the time where the boy met his first love in the form of the very first downloaded game, and now he was sincerely jubilant, like that same 9-year-old child, looking at the old monitor. The smile of euphoria remained on his face for some time, and great interest shone in his eyes. But gradually the lips became narrower and narrower, and the sparkle in the eyes faded with every moment. The jubilation was replaced by rapid addiction, and there was no trace left of the previous emotions. And very soon all his efforts to once again experience the past euphoria completely lost their meaning. Meanwhile, John literally smashed his opponent's face with another blow from a stick. Another blow pierced the ground, and the guild member fell dead with a loud, distinctive thud. The earth around continuously trembled and exploded from the hero's actions, and split apart in the most unexpected places. Mr. King watched the chaos unfolding before him, with an unreadable expression on his face. The man clenched his teeth again and tensely clenched his jaws, either from fear or anger. Lifeless bodies scattered by explosions lay scattered in the cracks in the floor around. Baring his teeth in a grin, John turned around, confirming to himself that he was almost done with this. He looked at Mr. King and Mr. Kim and asked mockingly if they were the only two left. Guild leader Hallasun looked down, clearly unable to say a word. The hero relaxed and tucked his wooden club into his bosom. He exclaimed enthusiastically that such a miserable end had come to P2W players and asked why they were stealing other people's equipment. "Time for a beating, old man," John smiled triumphantly, slowly approaching. These words caused even more sweat to run down Mr. King's face in anticipation of pain. He remembered how, without a drop of doubt, he quickly twirled his finger on the mouse wheel in his office. How he, as if hypnotized, stared fixedly at the screen of the old white monitor. Made an in-game purchase worth around 12 trillion won at one time. He was not the only one who changed under the pressure of the times, although changes affected all areas of his life. There was no longer any need for effort, as it only took 2 clicks to become the strongest, and those who were unable to pay were simply humiliated for it. Director King rose slowly from his chair, resting his palms on the armrests. He walked over to the sofa, thinking that every game he played from then on was the same. And so, he reached the final, critically acclaimed moment when he carefully picked up the expensive VR glasses. Chrono Life, with its versatility and popularity, became exactly this game. No matter how, the man wanted to find something he had long forgotten. He gathered people around him to recreate what remained in the past, became a leader to experience that feeling of victory over life again. And here it is, the lair of the Hallasun Guild. A large table, 4 divine kings, and Mr. King nearby. He became the head of his own large closed community. But now all that was left of this community was its name, and the club was already flying in its direction. However, John did not kill him and hit him as weakly as possible, while comically hunching over and making a face. "Skill? Fight without killing," the hero said calmly, making an even bigger face. Blood gushed from Mr. King's mouth, and he began coughing uncontrollably. Then the man fell to the cold ground with a crash of his golden armor. While he was shaking in pain, unable to rise, Mr. Kim called out to him. And John repeated that the Hallasun Guild was now finished and insistently asked not to bother Boss Love. It irritated him. "I hope we never see each other again, old man." The guy said goodbye, turned around and walked away. Mr. King suddenly clenched his trembling hands into fists. "It's you, isn't it?" he asked hoarsely, rising to his feet. The leader of Hallasun asked if John was the one who destroyed the top 5 guilds and killed 3 million players of the World Alliance. The hero turned around and his expression suddenly became more serious. Mr. King couldn't stand it. He began to laugh nervously and hysterically. Taking a few trembling steps towards the boy, the man asked, "How much money did you spend on this? It really takes a lot to have that kind of power," the guild leader continued curiously. The hero listened silently as the old man continued that the boy would soon understand something important. All efforts were spent on searching for something that in fact did not exist at all. Mr. Kim heard these words, surprised by his boss's sudden revelation. The old man was genuinely worried about his boss, even if it was not mutual. Having heard the man's monologue, John asked again what nonsense he was just talking about and added that he himself had also spent a lot of money on the game. Mr. King nervously began to consider how much the hero could have spent on such power. Tens of billions? No, hundreds of billions. And John, standing half-turned to him and looking at him from under his brows, paused dramatically. 55,000 won for basic warrior equipment, the guy finally said. At this moment, Mr. King was unable to utter a word. The man stood there in complete stupor, his jaw almost dropping in shock. And the hero turned around and walked away again. His mission as an observer was fulfilled. The expression on the Hallasun Guild leader's face was unreadable for a long time. 55,000 won. For a warrior's basic equipment? The old man muttered under his breath. His first attempts to play in his distant childhood came back to him again. Those special feelings from passing levels, euphoria and delight. The director smiled bitterly, realizing how pathetic he had actually been all this time. Then the man began to laugh even harder, as if hysterically. Mr. Kim looked up at him with surprise and confusion. Suddenly, the boss asked how many games they played after Lineage, and the old man replied that about 8. The director's bitter grin gradually grew wider. Smiling almost sadly, Mr. King exclaimed that this game was really very interesting. Of course! A familiar, overly gentle female voice suddenly rang out. The guild leader winced, immediately looking for the speaker out of the corner of his eye, and Lilith added that chronolife was divine. The girl waved at him with a sweet smile and remarked that it was quite a nice night. "It's been a while since I've been here," Lilith remarked, casually walking around the remains of the Hallison Guild's shelter. Suddenly, she sharply scraped her heel on the half-destroyed tiles, turning back. "By the way, are you well prepared?" the girl asked, flashing a carefree smile. Mr. King replied sullenly and a little confusedly that the preparations had gone well, and Lilith noticed that he said this in the past tense. The man did not make excuses or explain anything, and simply added that he was breaking off the cooperation agreement with her. Although the heroine did not seem at all surprised by his words, for a second, a shadow of irritation flashed across her face, but it was immediately replaced by a slight half-smile. "So that's how it is?" Not a moment passed before her staff swung down and pierced the guildmaster, spraying his blood everywhere. Mr. Kim watched this action defenselessly, because all this time he was unable to move. Alarm, disgust, and horror were mixed in his gaze at the horrific picture opposite. Mr. King, split in two, fell to the already blood-spattered floor. "Master?" the old man called out hesitantly in a hoarse, trembling voice. Then, when there was no response from the breathless answer, his voice turned into a hysterical scream. At this time, Lilith stood calmly opposite with an innocent face, thinking about something. "I guess I should ask why, but I'm in a terrible mood right now," she finally giggled. And a second later, she pierced Mr. Kim's paralyzed body with her staff, causing a hoarse cry. A thick drop of thick liquid fell on her cheek, staining it a dirty, blackening color. Tears mixed with blood slowly rolled down to the suffering man's chin. His palm continued to tremble in pain for a few seconds until it fell onto the cold floor. Now the girl stood completely alone among mountains of corpses and two recently killed old men. A relaxed smile never left her lips as trickles of blood framed her jaw. She suddenly remembered John's words. "The Hallison Guild is finished now, so don't bother Boss Love anymore, it's annoying." Lilith's hair was dyed black again, signifying that she had once again become the goddess of life. In her new guise, the girl thought about the hero's fleeting phrase with a smile. "Who the hell is Boss Love?" she asked into the void, her lips stretched upward but not hiding her slight irritation. Suddenly, a time card appeared with a counter on it, on which the number 998.99 was written. The system's voice announced that John had destroyed the Hallison Guild and that combat experience was now being calculated, causing the numbers on the timesheet to click and change. To the accompaniment of a solemn soundtrack, the numbers now changed to 999 zeros. A sound came from the system, and the hero looked up, trying to understand what was happening. To which the system's voice announced with congratulations that the hero had reached the maximum level. "What is this?" the hero asked skeptically, and Urus also expressed his incomprehension. "Haven't you heard?" "The system just said I've reached the max level," the guy replied, simultaneously opening his status. For a few seconds they looked at the status, where only the character's avatar had changed. However, upon closer inspection, both saw that next to the newbie status, there was now a level of 9999. The hero and the beast looked at the new status in silence for a while, with disbelief and eyes the size of a plate. "What?" came a loud cry into the void as the star-studded sky turned various shades of purple and violet. One of the most popular open-world VR games that includes romance, open world, and an interesting storyline. Chrono Life has gradually become even more popular, and now its position among games has changed. Number 1 in the total number of users in the game, the most active of them. Number 1 in sales, and of course in reviews. Many consider this virtual reality game to be the best in the world. But there is a fly in the ointment. In an interview about Chrono Life, one pro gamer speculated on how soon he would be able to reach the max level and leaned towards never. Although players all over the world have been spending days and nights playing this game, no one has ever managed to reach the highest level. The same one that flashes the numbers 999 on the level sheet and is called the master level. "I don't know. Even if all the best players like me played 24/7, it could take decades," the guy concluded. However, at that very moment in the game, John's status showed exactly this level 999. And even the guy himself looking there did not understand how this could happen. "I can't even believe that you are the first to reach the level of a master," Urus rejoiced. "As expected, the owner is amazing. I'm so proud of you." The animal circled around the hero, while he was still looking at the status window in a stupor. Sweating profusely, the boy suddenly remembered the very beginning of his journey. On that fateful day, he, a recognized loser, had only the 7th level. And now, after so many events, The obvious conclusion suggested itself. On the very first day of receiving the club, 800,000 players were killed, and at the same time, an infinite number of monsters and their dungeons were hit. Then the experience was added by acquiring the strongest two-headed boss, Chronolife. At the same time, the army belonging to the highest level dungeon was also killed. Not to mention the destruction of 3 million players from the World Guild Alliance. Of course, we shouldn't forget how the hero blew up the planet with one blow. Wiping an entire planet off the face of the game has certainly accumulated a lot of experience. Thus, the world's first player with such an unattainable level of mastery appeared. Suddenly, a bright golden glow appeared under John's feet. The boy looked down in surprise, now completely illuminated by a golden halo. Another moment, and a column of golden light shot upward, causing even the hero's cloak to rise. The system's voice announced that the player who had achieved master level would be automatically sent to the transcendental space. And with a bright flash in the night, the boy and his pet suddenly disappeared. And in the sky, on the other hand, a snow-white crescent gradually appeared. Kate lay on the grass, lazily sprawled like a star right on the hill. Her expression clearly showed how bored she had become with this activity for the past few hours. "I'm bored," the girl muttered, looking at the moon through the green leaves of the tree under which she lay. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. Her chin trembled with anger as she clenched her teeth. "Where the hell are those panties?" Kate screamed between curse words, jumping up from the ground. She remembered how the hero asked her to wait a little and promised to return during the day, but now the sun had long since set. The girl frowned, once again remembering their last conversation. How John suddenly asked what the name of the guild was whose people stole her brass knuckles. And then he asked to tell everything about them, who these people are and what they do for a living. Then the heroine was so impressed by his heroic aura that she even blushed a little. The girl sighed heavily again, but still managed to calm her irritation. "It doesn't matter," Kate cried, falling back onto her back again, returning to the same position as before. "Very well. The good lady will wait another hour," she muttered under her breath, settling herself more comfortably. A small air island was flying in the middle of the vast space woven from stars. It consisted of stones covered with moss and dust, connected into steps that led to its top. "Where am I?" John muttered, looking around the new space with skepticism. The hero and Urus stood silently on the grass, at the epicenter of the island's summit, among the rubble of buildings and the remains of destruction. "Why am I always being dragged somewhere without my consent lately? First by some creator, then by the president of Chronolife, now this," John grumbled, while Urus admired his popularity. "Welcome, child," came a thunderous voice from somewhere above. "I didn't think I'd meet you so soon," the voice continued, as the ground beneath John's feet gradually began to shake. "You really are outstanding." The air itself seemed to tremble now. With the appearance of a certain voice, the entire island shook. "I am the guide of the best," the bluish creature answered the silent question. And this mysterious, loud-voiced creature with many hands, in which were various weapons, was none other than the god of superiority. "I appreciate you taking part in this difficult journey," the god replied with a half-smile. "The fact that you have worked your way up to the level of a master, starting from a beginner, is truly worthy of respect," he added. Urus asked, confused, what the god was talking about, to which John replied that he had previously been only a novice investigator. Suddenly, the system's voice was heard, announcing that the necessary conditions had been met, and the transition to the hidden class had begun. The guy was once again surrounded by a golden pillar of magic, the wind lifting his cloak up. Strange orange boulders began to form around John. On one of these large stones, a golden sword was carved. With a characteristic sound, the rune from the stone shot at the hero, and the guy almost fell back due to inertia. The system's voice announced that the sword's soul had entered John's body, and he opened his mouth in amazement. With each passing second, more and more runes began to form on the cobblestones, and they were all already flying into the guy under the announcement of the penetration of new souls into his body. John finally realized what was happening, and the souls of many weapons had already entered him. Finally, the system notified that his profession change from beginner to master had been successfully completed, and a wide grin appeared on the guy's face. And after that, the golden glow decreased, gradually lowering the hero to the ground. Now his status has officially changed to the hidden class of a novice master. The system also announced that privileges would be granted to the profession. Now all of his stats were automatically reset, and the points not distributed were tripled. Urus also looked at the hero status window and opened his mouth in surprise. "What? Your unallocated points are now 14,985?" The little animal cried out in shock. He was extremely surprised that his master's points had tripled so suddenly due to a bug in the game. "And why did that surprise you more than the fact that I was now in a hidden class?" John asked. To this, Urus shouted that, in theory, the hero should only receive 5 points when leveling up, but he received 15. And that meant that even if another user showed up with the maximum level, John would still have 3 times the points. But the guy didn't react to all this very brightly, and caused Urus's indignation. "This will go down in the history of the gaming community as the greatest achievement," the animal exclaimed, and John had an epiphany. The guy looked at his report card once again with his new number of points. He chuckled thoughtfully, looking at his report card in silence for a few seconds. And then he grinned widely, realizing the benefit of this situation for himself. John poked at the plus sign next to the characteristic, and the system's voice announced that it had increased. With a sly smile from ear to ear, he continued to actively improve his characteristics. "What are you doing, Master?" Urus asked him curiously. "Can't you see? I'm distributing points. If I hold my finger down, it'll go faster," the hero exclaimed, while continuous notifications sounded from the tab. "But why do you distribute them so unwisely?" the little animal muttered, while the owner, ignoring his words, continued to poke. "You'll be treated like a loser if you waste even one," Urus grumbled. But when he didn't see a reaction, his mouth dropped open in shock. The dragon was outraged that the hero spent all his points on one characteristic, and not even on the one that was worth it. But John was happy with his choice. The system's voice announced that all the points had been distributed, and the guy with glowing eyes and a wide grin replied that he didn't need any other characteristics. It was painful for Urus to realize this, but his master had screwed up and confirmed his status as a complete loser. Meanwhile, in the Chrono Life Development Building, surrounded by evening twilight, someone's anxious, quick steps were heard on the gray office parquet floor. "President, we have a problem!" The employee who came running shouted to the developer who was sitting at the computer. "What happened?" the man asked sullenly, holding a bowl of spicy radish rice soup in his hand. "You have to see this!" exclaimed the employee, clearly sweating from nerves. But when he added that the issue was the user, the president himself became tense. A huge number of monitors, which simultaneously contained different locations and tracked characteristics. The nimble fingers of an experienced programmer quickly typed on the keyboard. "What's the problem?" the blonde asked, coming closer with an expensive cigar in his mouth. "Here, look at this," the programmer asked in a trembling voice. "Wow! The boy with the wooden club has reached the maximum level," the man exclaimed, smiling widely. John and Urus were clearly visible on the monitor, and their characteristics were described in detail on the sides. But the programmer replied that it was not about the level, but about the characteristic the guy chose. From the monitor, you could hear Urus being indignant that the player chose exactly that one to improve. "And what characteristic did he choose there?" the director asked almost skeptically. "This one," the programmer mumbled in a trembling voice, pointing his finger at the monitor. Then the man's eyes widened in surprise at the realization, and suddenly he couldn't help but burst out laughing, noticing that the hero was really enjoying the game in his own way. This made his employee nervous, because the chosen characteristic makes John's character third-rate. The guy added that when the hero realizes that he has created garbage, he will get angry and do something terrible. To this, the blonde replied that the company cannot interfere with the player's choice. The man did not respond to the programmer's attempts to refute his words and turned back to the door. "President?" The programmer turned to him, not knowing what to do with the problem. Meanwhile, the blonde, grabbing the door handle, was mentally surprised by the characterization chosen by the hero and the status of a novice master. Although the wide, 32-toothed grin with a cigar never left his face, the worst, most powerful character in the history of virtual reality games has appeared, the director concluded. Meanwhile, John finally removed his finger from the tab with the allocated points. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to the god of supremacy. God said in a calm voice that there was one last step in leadership. "You have one chance," he said, as the boy listened in amazement. "You have the right to receive one of my superior weapons," the deity proclaimed, flashing the equipment in his hands. "What a lucky guy I am. If it's free, then there's no reason to refuse," the hero happily replied. John began to examine the hands of the deity, choosing from among the numerous silver items. All these spears, bows, swords, crossbows, and arrows looked really amazing. The hero thought hard, frowning and crossing his arms over his chest. He suddenly raised his head and shouted that he had finally decided what to choose. The guy held out his hand expectantly. "Just give me everything you have," John said with an almost crazy look on his face. The god of transcendence was silent for a while, his face showing no signs of emotion. "Human child, "I cannot fulfill this request," the deity finally replied. He added, "Excessive greed leads to great anger, so choose wisely." But the hero cut him off abruptly when his bangs dangerously covered his eyes with a shadow. "So are you going to give them to me just like that, or only if I beat you?" John asked calmly. Despite the lack of reaction from the deity, Urus was completely terrified. At the same time, the programmer who was watching this opened his mouth in shock, and the director stopped half a step away. The blonde's surprise was so strong that he stood silently for a couple of seconds, turning to the monitor, and his mouth opened so wide in shock that even the cigar fell out of it. However, there was no reaction from the god of superiority for some time, until suddenly the muscles in his temples began to twitch and the veins in his head began to bulge with anger, and the system alerted him to his anger. The system announced that relations with the god of supremacy had deteriorated to hostile as he angrily readied his weapons. The guy didn't waste any time either, and had already comfortably grabbed the club in his hand. "I suppose you're asking for a fight?" John asked with an evil grin. The deity, with red eyes burning with rage, growled in response. One of his silver equipments flew straight down at the hero, but John was not afraid, but only clutched his wooden club tighter. A bright blue beam the size of the god of supremacy himself pierced the hero. A column of dust, dirt, and grass gradually settled around the fallen anchor. Urus grabbed his head, looking for his master and mentally indignant at why he stopped his attack. "I never thought I would kill a superior with my own hands," the god grumbled. He wanted to add how sorry he was for how he had been burned by the column of bright scarlet flame. When the fire disappeared, only half of the heavily breathing deity's face remained, but even that was rapidly melting. "It hurt, I guess, because you're a god," the mostly unharmed hero muttered from the clearing dust. John grinned triumphantly as his health stats instantly refilled. The characteristic chosen by the hero increases health points, affects the speed of their restoration, and gives resistance to other effects. Urus looked at this and gradually realized why the guy chose this. He remembered shouting that John was crazy for choosing only one, and the little animal still didn't understand why it was specifically the health characteristic. "Master, you have made a fatal mistake. Your character has become trash," Urus exclaimed. When John asked why, the animal replied that all equipment in Chrono Life has its own weight, and regardless of profession, a minimum level of strength is required. But because of the hero's stupid choice, he will no longer be able to have any other weapon except the club, although the guy doesn't mind. Suddenly, a new blue notification window appeared between them. It stated that the conditions for the hidden skill had been met, and while Urus asked questions in surprise, the hero read the contents. John's hidden skill is a healing factor that guarantees immediate healing after any damage and complete immunity to status effects such as poison, disease, or paralysis. On the side of the hero's health points tab, the entire red bar is filled, despite the small damage previously. "A trash character, you say?" The guy laughed, pushing his pet with his cheek. Meanwhile, the god of superiority continued to groan in pain, clutching the unmelted remains of his face. The deity suddenly clenched her teeth, growling a curse under her breath towards John. "How dare this insignificant mortal!" he roared in a loud bass voice, shooting a laser from his eye. John didn't expect the sudden attack, so he didn't have time to dodge, and the blue beam pierced his torso. Dripping black blood, the boy instantly fell to the ground, surprised by what had happened. Urus was no less shocked than he was, and immediately cried out plaintively, "Master!" When the hero came to his senses, instead of any expected reaction, he began to laugh. "As expected, Chrono Life is divine," the hero joyfully babbled, as the wound on his chest began to instantly close. "Ugh, how disgusting," the little animal thought to himself, watching the unsightly regeneration. But the god of superiority did not give in. With cries of anger, he sharpened his other weapons. But all his blows only made the guy laugh, although they cut him lengthwise and crosswise. After all, the tab with health points showed the same picture. The bar value turned red again and again. The deity only grew more enraged, continuing his endless rapid blows. With a triumphant grin on his face, the boy stood his ground while his opponent, in furious agony, struck out. No matter what he did, his health points remained full and no damage was done to John. "Phew, great!" The hero finally calmed his laughter, looking at the god of superiority. "Maybe I should just end this?" he asked calmly with a smile, unlike the enraged deity. "Thank you. I have benefited greatly from our meeting. Now hand over your weapon and get lost," John ordered. The god of supremacy gritted his teeth again as his skin melted even more, running down his cheek. "Human child, your endless greed will one day consume you," he muttered. The deity wanted to finish the sentence about the consequences, but the hero had already swung his club. "So what?" The guy smiled smugly, about to strike, and at that moment the club flashed through the air with a dull sound, leaving a light trace. "Vertical strike!" the boy shouted, after which a pillar of flame and lightning pierced the island. When the system declared that the god of supremacy had ceased to exist, the space of the sky and the island itself began to crack. Everything around instantly began to shatter into thousands of pieces, like a mirror. The system's voice announced that the transcendental space was about to collapse, and the hero would be transferred to the main world. And so, among the endless white canvas, accessible to the eye, at first only an island and a patch of sky remained. Gradually, even that small space began to disappear, leaving behind only a bluish crack, until all that remained of the transcendental space and the island was a white expanse. Meanwhile, the main gaming area was quite calm, until a bright, sharp flash of light illuminated the dark night forest. The hero found himself transported here, standing among halos of dust and dirt. His own weapons immediately began to fall with a clang before his feet. Gradually, John found himself surrounded by a superb bow, sword, spear, and a bunch of other silver equipment. When the system's voice announced that the boy had become the owner of superior weapons, an evil grin painted his face. Suddenly, each weapon lit up and disappeared behind a bluish magical haze. "Superior weapons will be moved into subspace, and they will always come to your call," the system confirmed. John grinned widely from ear to ear, exulting in his victory. "Excellent!" The guy rejoiced like a child, blushing with happiness. At that very moment, his self-proclaimed boss was in a complete rage. "How could you make me wait, Panties?" Her hair stood on end with rage, and the aura around her did not bode well. But suddenly, behind her, in the bushes, strange, suspicious rustling sounds were heard. 2 fingers were pressed to the temple in a joyful greeting gesture. "Hello, I'm back!" John exclaimed, smiling happily and a little stupidly. However, his inspired face was immediately met with a blue knuckle duster on Kate's hand. Kicking the hero, the girl, without losing heart, shouted, "Do you want to die so badly? I told you to wait a little, but it's already night. But I thought I'd be back soon. Something delayed me, but now I'm here." The guy tried to justify himself, holding his head and bleeding from his nose. Suddenly, Kate stopped beating John, instead clenching her teeth in anger. She turned sharply away from him and, quickly walking away, shouted, "I'm leaving!" "Where are you going?" the hero asked, to which the girl hissed that she was leaving the game. "Okay, goodbye," John muttered uncertainly, afraid of getting punched in the face again. For a moment, Kate paused again. Her anger even seemed to cool a little. She relaxed her clenched teeth, though her eyes were still hidden by the shadow of her bangs. "Be here tomorrow evening at 7:30. I'll finish work and come, understand me?" she exclaimed without turning around. "And God forbid you're late, I'll finish you off," Kate grumbled at the end, turning to face John and showing a slight blush. And then she disappeared into teleportation, leaving the hero and Eurus to be stunned and ponder her words. "He does whatever comes into his head," the guy muttered, while the animal was clearly enjoying watching the events unfold from the sidelines. John decided that, in principle, it was time for him to go, because in reality it was already well past midnight. When the guy was already pressing yes in the exit option tab, Eurus quietly said goodbye to him. So the action moved into the real world, specifically into the building of virtual reality gaming rooms. "Thank you. Come again." The hall workers politely said goodbye as John walked out into the street. The guy yawned a little tiredly, wiping away the tears that had appeared from the yawn. "Today was a great day and Chrono Life is so damn fun." John smiled to himself as he walked down the sidewalk. "By the way, I wonder how much you can sell superior weapons for. You can get a lot of money for them," the guy thought with a greedy grin. "It would be a shame if they couldn't be sold," he summed up to himself. Suddenly, his gaze fell on the already familiar restaurant with rice soups. John looked at the enticing sign and thought it would be a good idea to buy himself a bowl. But when I took out my wallet and saw one lonely bill in it, I sadly thought that this time it was not meant to be. "I'm so tired of being poor," the dejected guy thought as he shuffled off in the other direction. "And the fee for the game keeps going up. Maybe I should pick up some more shifts at my part-time job?" John sighed heavily. Suddenly the hero slowed down, his slippers scraping against the asphalt for the last time. He stopped in the middle of the road, illuminated by the city lights and bright stars at night. "Wait a minute." Suddenly the realization flashed through his mind. The boy remembered how Eurus once said that Kate's weapon itself was worth 10 million gold, and how the hero was surprised then because that translated into 10 million won. As the little animal then added, All of her equipment in total cost 100 million gold, and accordingly, 1. A wide grin touched the guy's lips again at the thought that if he sold the in-game items, he would be able to exchange them for real money. With one sharp movement, he turned in the opposite direction. So John rushed through the high-rise buildings of the Night City back to the gaming room, inspired by his plan. The action from the real world was teleported into the game world. One location in Chrono Life is called a forbidden place on the border between life and death. No one has yet managed to clear this top-level hunting ground. But for unknown reasons, the place where the strongest two-headed dragon lives remained hidden. It was here, in the Valley of the Dead, that the hero first arrived straight from the game room. A small gray paw with purple claws is wrapped in a neat snow-white cuff. "Welcome, master!" Urus bowed hospitably, flashing his improvised mustache and vest, like a hotel hostess. But all his efforts to create an atmosphere were brazenly ignored. John simply walked past. With an evil grimace, the hero exclaimed, "Urus, I will be under your care for some time." To this, the upset animal wished that the owner would enjoy all the content with all his heart, while the hero laughed like crazy. "I was blinded by revenge and didn't think about collecting the items at all, just leaving them here, but now I need to work hard," John proclaimed in an inhuman voice, his eyes sparkling. "Sorry, guys," Urus mentally begged, already crying from the expected consequences. After a few moments of silence, rustling sounds were heard inside the cave. Opposite John, a wall of large purple pairs of eyes appeared like a layer of dust. The monsters on the right roared triumphantly, their eyes flashing with a fierce fire. The monsters from the left side immediately joined them. A smug grin played on the hero's lips as he said, "Let's do it." Looking at the wall of monsters in front of him, the boy thought that this day would be the beginning of the end of his worthless, poor life. "Let's raise some money for me now, and I'll be rich in no time," John added with the glee of a child. Using the total destruction technique, the hero directed a strike with golden flames at the monsters. Among them, the outline of Turbot of Despair was visible, perched on top of the pile. Lapis of the Abyss stood there, looking at John with burning, narrow eyes. And at the bottom of this trio of the strongest from the army of Urus was Trizion of Dawn. Instantly, a pillar of fire surrounded the monsters, causing them to roar in pain. Within a second, nothing remained of them except columns of dust and ash. So in just 2 small blows, all the monsters from the Valley of the Dead were destroyed. A small purple sword suddenly fell onto the skulls at the hero's feet. And then, along with him, valuable objects began to fall from the sky like rain from all sides. "You're finally done, master. You're such a good boy," the little animal exclaimed joyfully. "Finished? What are you talking about? I just started." John laughed evilly, his eyes flashing with greed. At this, his pet could only be quietly horrified, no longer knowing what to expect from his master. Meanwhile, the completely fallen objects sparkled with a purple light, reflecting off the walls of the cave. "Look around, the monsters have already been reborn," the hero replied contentedly. And indeed, the wall of monsters in full force once again appeared in front of John. And although Urus was not threatened by their fate, because he is a special creature that cannot be reborn, the little animal, with tears in his eyes, mentally begged them to run away. Meanwhile, the hero, swinging his club again before striking, said, "This is the first time I'm selling things. Maybe I should save up some more for a reserve?" And again a greedy, wide grin on his lips. So the planet was once again pierced by a blow from a wooden club, sending circles of smoke into space. One afternoon at Harvard University, there was a very interesting lecture. "Do you guys know Bill Gates?" the professor asked, flashing his bald head. "The richest man in the world, the founder of Microsoft. He once found $100 on his way to work," the professor began the story. But in the end, Bill Gates didn't even look at them and walked past. "Do you know why?" the teacher asked the very interested audience. In fact, if a man had picked up this money from the ground, he would have suffered nothing but losses. It would take 2 or 3 seconds to crouch down and pick up the bills, but he earns at least 150 per second. And at the very least, he would have lost $200, was how the teacher ended an excellent lecture, seasoned with a funny joke. However, at the same time, a new record was discovered in the Valley of the Dead, covered with skulls. The valuable items sparkled, glowing purple. There were so many of them that they now accumulated into a huge, sparkling mountain. The hero laughed uncontrollably, and considering the respawn delay, killing the monsters 100 times took about an hour. The total cost of all the dropped items was quite a tidy sum. Based on the lecture mentioned earlier, it can be calculated that Bill Gates earns about 500 million won per hour, and a simple South Korean part-time worker at a store earned about 15 billion won per hour, which is much more than the richest person. The green portal from the wall of endless program code transferred from the game space to the real world. The sky was a pleasant bluish color with fluffy clouds surrounding the city's high-rise buildings. "Thank you for your purchase. Come again," said the salesman from the store with the bright brand name. John walked out of the store flashing expensive slippers with the symbols of that very brand. Now the guy was wearing solid dark glasses. Instead of the holy sports jacket he was wearing, a new one worth 2 million won. And instead of the old pants he was wearing, a perfect pair worth 1.5 million won. He pompously got into a 414 million won car filled with various expensive trinkets. The guys around turned around in amazement at this spectacle. The girls looked at the hero almost enchanted. From all sides there were shouts of how cool he was and how luxurious his Lamborghini was. And John grinned contentedly, taking off his dark glasses that matched his clothes, which cost a little over 2 million won. He drove along the main roads with dignity and demonstrative speed, standing out in his yellow car. "It's time to rest," the guy exclaimed, gripping the steering wheel of the car tightly. Suddenly, one of the Lamborghini's wheels began to skid dangerously on the asphalt. With a loud, characteristic clang, the car quickly crashed into a pole. For a few seconds, the guy sat in the driver's seat in a stupor, still clinging to the steering wheel. As the understanding of the situation began to dawn on him, an expression of horror framed his face. "My Lamborghini is worth 400 million, John cried out in dismay, clutching his head in his hands. And now, another moment, he was sitting behind the wheel of a brand new blue car with the same smug expression. "Oh, right, now I can buy a new one," the hero laughed, driving further around the city. Meanwhile, the Chrono Life Development Building is surrounded by tree crowns from below. The director, with a heavy heart, lit another expensive, large cigarette. The man, with a heavy, tired sigh, placed his hand on his forehead, leaning his elbow on the table at which he sat. The blonde then ordered his subordinate to continue his report on the current circumstances in the company. He could easily read between the lines of a long report that the company was on the verge of collapse and the guy needed to get out. The man grumbled angrily that the guy had said his thoughts out loud, and he had been unable to respond. The developer then asked if there was a way to block John's transactions, to which the subordinate replied in the negative, adding that the transactions had only recently been added. During another heavy sigh, someone suddenly called the man's phone. The blonde picked up the phone and answered the sudden, unexpected call in a tired voice. "Hello, President. How are you?" John asked, feigning happiness. "By the way, I'm going to spend money now. Maybe I should buy you something." The guy laughed into the phone. The man's legs began to shake violently with anger, along with the phone in his hand. The stream of obscene language on the other side was so loud that the hero abruptly pulled the phone away from his ear. "What's wrong with him?" the guy asked calmly, disconnecting the call. "What else should I buy?" John thought relaxedly, listing what he already had. Something was still missing, some key moment, something special, he thought, placing his hands behind his head and opening his mouth in mental contemplation. Suddenly, with newfound determination, the boy grabbed the steering wheel of the car. With a wide, happy smile, he suddenly remembered that he had completely forgotten about the most important thing. The huge figured building was illuminated by the sun, and its roof reached to the sky. And John laughed uncontrollably at his rare change in position in society. His beautiful beige apartment was further proof of this. "Welcome home!" the guy shouted enthusiastically, looking around the rooms, and even the solid piano in the guest room. "Here it is, my perfect key moment." The hero's joy was truly beyond measure. Suddenly, John remembered the mandatory procedure immediately after moving. A finger gently rang the small, shiny doorbell. The hero was already standing near the neighboring apartment with a pie in his hands, ringing the doorbell with short breaks. "Who is it?" came from the intercom with the camera opposite the guy. "I'm your new neighbor. I just moved in today. I want to treat you to a rice cake," John answered with a smile. When rice cake was mentioned, there was some commotion on the other side, and after a couple of minutes they asked us to wait a bit. The door to the apartment swung open deliberately slowly, revealing John's new neighbor. "Hello, I hope we can become friends," the guy babbled amiably, holding out the candy. But when he looked at the stranger, his eyes widened in sudden surprise. Looking at the girl in round red glasses, the hero suddenly thought that the purchase was far from the key point. Sarah looked at him with the same slight pleasant surprise, timidly peeking out from behind the door. They stood opposite each other and stared into each other's eyes as if in slow motion. There was a strong feeling that something like this had happened before, and not as long ago as it might seem. Looking at the features of his new neighbor, John realized that his key moment had arrived right now. The girl continued to look at him in the same stupor. her mouth slightly open. And the green wall portal of endless binary code justified the transition from reality to the game space. The action took place in a quiet valley of the dead, which became that way after the hero's bullying. Someone's scaly clawed paws stepped into the cave, crunching skulls along the way. An unfamiliar silhouette walked through the forbidden place, known to all the best players. The army of Eurus, in particular the most powerful monsters that comprised it, appeared before the stranger. He extended an equally clawed purple fire-covered black palm forward. A bright red flame scorched everything in front of the creature in a total destruction technique. Red light spread around the horned humanoid monster. "Arrogant man, how dare you come here?" The three strongest of the Eurus army were indignant. The monsters approached the suspicious stranger menacingly. "How stupid you are since you didn't even acknowledge your master," the monster hissed angrily through his fangs. Suddenly, 3 long tentacles appeared from behind his back and instantly pierced the strongest monsters. As soon as the tentacle latched onto the monster's skin, it began to suck out its life force. The beasts screamed in agony, but their strength instantly faded and they were unable to resist. The skin of each was completely dehydrated, and ribs and remnants of tendons became visible. The tentacles continued to actively suck the last strength out of the monsters. They were pumped to that very stranger with the horn, like juice through a straw. And after a couple of minutes, the 3 strongest monsters of Eurus's army died completely. They lost the ability to resurrect. The tentacles instantly freed themselves from under the lifeless bodies and hid behind the owner's back. The system's voice confirmed that the stranger had absorbed the target's level and characteristics, and the information about the 3 strongest monsters of the Eurus army has now been completely removed. The monster stood motionless for a moment, as if lost in thought. He suddenly remembered the moment when John's club had incinerated Eurus's second head. In its place, only a smooth trace of the cut on the cervical vertebrae remained. But the truth is that the second head began to regenerate, albeit separately from the body. The scaly, long-haired creature clenched its fanged mouth. When Eurus appeared in the form of the soul of the club, he immediately saw that the second head was lost somewhere. And this very monster is the lost second head of the all-powerful 2-headed dragon. He remembered the face of the one who had mercilessly separated his part from the general body. "My name is Huracan, and I was born to exterminate all people." The monster's eyes sparkled with purple fire. "The same pop star who has reached #1 on the charts 14 times in a row. The #1 idol singer and composer in the music industry is a girl named Sarah. They have known John for quite a long time in the game, but they have never met in real life. Her alias in Chrono Life is Kate, aka Sis, Teacher, Love, and Love's boss." Finally, the day came when the hero met his boss for the first time in reality. He remembered the eternally angry, impudent, and furious Kate, who would rather kick the hero than eat bread. Now, a charming, slightly embarrassed Sarah stood before him, accepting the pie with a smile. John was slightly taken aback, looking at her, as if he had finally felt the familiar sensation. But he didn't recognize the cruel gaming partner in such a cute idol. A couple of minutes later, the door on the other side slammed shut and the girl ran into the manager on the threshold. When asked what Sarah had in her hands, she replied that her new neighbor had given her the pie, which raised even more questions. The pink-haired girl was also deep in thought, feeling a familiar feeling that she could see him somewhere. Images of white underpants came to mind, or rather memories of their owner. The girl immediately rolled her eyes, trying to remember the face of panties, but to no avail. She handed the rice cake to her manager, confirming the fact that the two of them never recognized each other due to the differences between the game model and the real person. Suddenly, the woman brought Sarah out of her thoughts, reminding her to change out of her school uniform. The girl was indignant that she had just come home from school, to which her manager replied with a smile that they could reschedule, but her charge really wanted to go play at 7:30. Sarah remembered her last conversation with John and gritted her teeth in anger, accepting defeat. "Okay, I just need to change my clothes." "Sister, you hurry too," the heroine exclaimed, already halfway to the room. The manager looked at her with understanding, chewing a piece of pie, leaning her elbows on the table. "Just look at her. Did she meet some handsome lucky guy who stole her heart?" The woman smiled slyly at her thoughts. That same attractive lucky guy now for some reason looked extremely disappointed. "Where are my monsters?" John screamed loudly into the emptiness of the Cave of the Dead, so that his voice echoed off its walls. "Hey, what happened? Did your subordinates escape?" The hero angrily asked his pet, but he replied that it was impossible. Eurus added that his army's movement zone is limited by software, so they can't escape unless there's some kind of bug. But since the heroes were absolutely alone among the skulls, The monsters still disappeared without a trace for an unknown reason. The guy looked around sullenly and remained silent, but it was clear that he was already calmer. Okay, this isn't the only hunting ground. I just use other locations to make money, John sighed, while Eurus thoughtfully scratched his chin. Suddenly, the little animal remembered the owner had to meet with Love's boss today, and the hero agreed and noted that it was already almost 7:30. Okay, today's hunt ended in failure. Let's go. The guy summed up and turned towards the exit. How annoying. How long do I have to go? John grumbled, while the dragon was still scratching his chin thoughtfully. The animal felt a familiar and at the same time menacing aura, which made him wary. A snow-white crescent moon cut through the gloomy, densely gray sky and clouds. The sharp, small rocks on the hill were continuously covered with coarse snow. A huge beast roared from between the rocks. It was the level 190 summon boss, the giant snow snake Elaros. A long purple tentacle stretched out towards the snake's skin and was already pumping all the strength out of the monster. Finally, the tentacle broke away from the lifeless body, and the system announced that the target's characteristics had been absorbed. Sticky saliva flowed in thin streams down the scaly creature's chin. This is not enough, Huracan muttered under his breath, as if spellbound. I still don't have enough. The beast's eyes glowed with a hypnotic purple fire. He remembered John's face again and growled that there was still a long way to go to destroy him. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by the rustle of snow-white wings opposite. Oh my god, you've come so far, Lilith exclaimed, smoothly landing on the ground. What else could you expect from my beloved child? The girl smiled even wider. She wanted to ask if he had eaten well, but suddenly Huracan's tentacle grabbed her stomach. Lilith looked down for a few seconds, her eyes wide in surprise, and Huracan, as if under a spell, muttered again that he still didn't have enough strength. You do look delicious, though, the creature remarked, examining its new victim. The tentacle was already sucking energy from her stomach with its usual activity. Wait, Lilith pleaded, her voice shaking, fear piercing her features. However, in a moment he disappeared, because her eyes rolled back and her skin lost all its water and blood. The tentacle quickly peeled off from the back of the dead, dehydrated girl. For a short time, the body hung in the air opposite the one-horned dragon. Then it fell onto the cold snow, and the black hair lay lifelessly on the ground. However, the voice of the system announced to Huracan that the takeover had failed for unknown reasons. Oh, what was that? Really? Lilith said indignantly behind him, putting her hands on her hips. Mommy doesn't like surprises like that. Have you really started puberty? The girl scolded. Was that hallucination magic? I'm sure I absorbed it, Huracan muttered thoughtfully as the girl continued to grumble. I suppose you are inedible, but what is your nature then? The dragon asked curiously. When he added that the girl smelled similar to him, she smiled mysteriously again. Suddenly, Lilith sharply waved her hand to the left, pointing at something with her finger. Above, surrounded by rocks, the territory of the mountain village sparkled like a gold bar. Look over there. There's definitely plenty of food over there, the goddess of life finally said when the dragon's gaze caught the direction indicated. There you can eat as much as you want, the girl smiled slyly. The purple dragon eyes sparkled with a newfound fire of determination. Saliva once again dripped copiously onto the snow beneath the scaly monster. Lilith also noticed such a huge desire to feast on the new energy, and the smug, sly smile spread even brighter across her face. The beast opened its saber-toothed, drooling mouth wide in a semblance of a smile. With a wide, mad grin and eyes glowing with purple fire, he looked like he was going crazy. The clawed paws on the one-horned dragon's feet flew up above the snowy ground. As if by magic, an aura of danger surrounded his true form as Eurus's second head. I am Huracan, and I was born to exterminate all of humanity, the dragon roared with a jubilant roar. His aura was obscured by the image of the lower jaw of his brutally severed head. Huracan suddenly turned into a purple stream of energy and shot towards the village, leaving Lilith in the mountains. A wide, evil grin of anticipation never left his scaly lips. The dragon approached the village at the highest point among the mountains almost instantly. Huracan had already seen the tallest building among the small wooden houses where people lived their lives peacefully. A sudden purple beam crashed into the very epicenter of the village. The residents, engulfed by a strong wind, tried to take shelter and understand what was happening. Suddenly, a purple tentacle attached itself to one of the village players. It suddenly sucked all the energy out of his body, leaving behind an empty vessel right in front of his frightened companion. Bitter tears of fear, disgust, and pain flowed from her eyes. As the tentacle exited the boy's body, leaving a trail of smoke, the girl screamed. Meanwhile, the tentacles had already begun to simultaneously attach themselves to all the nearby inhabitants. They found everyone who tried to escape from there or hide somewhere. The terrifying silhouette of a one-horned dragon with a bunch of tentacles coming out of it was painted blood red. The system's voice announced every few seconds that the target's levels were being rapidly absorbed. And the dragon himself, with a saber-toothed smile full of gluttony, continued to choke on his saliva. It used to be a place where both newbies and professionals worked side by side. The frontline village was famous for its tranquility and abundance of resources. There were many newcomers there, as well as high-level and even better players. But now, in one instant, all these players became food for the second head of Eurus. And the more he signed, the brighter the diamond of energy on his chest glowed. A satisfied grin from saturation did not leave his face, and the system's voice announced the next character deletion. At this time, in reality, the game development building looked quite calm from the outside. But inside, everything was different. A subordinate suddenly burst into the director's office, shouting that they had new problems. He said that the flow of complaints from users does not stop, and they write everywhere, in the customer call center, in all communities, even in YouTube broadcasts. The support people are also paralyzed trying to help with user problems. But the complaints did not stop, and everyone from the support service sat in their seats, apologizing to the players. People had a lot of questions, from why if a character is eaten by a monster, they are deleted, to, has Chrono Life gone crazy? The developer sighed heavily, leaning back in his chair with another cigar, although a smile suddenly appeared on his lips. Huracan has already come out? Funny? The subordinate mumbled something questioningly, in confusion and panic from what was happening. To this, the director ordered that 2 characters be followed, one of whom was Huracan. Meanwhile, the village, or rather its remains, was already filled with bright flames. A one-horned dragon with an open eye on its chest stood among the wooden houses engulfed in flames. Oh my god, you're amazing. I can't believe you turned a frontline village into a ghost village overnight. Lilith giggled behind him. However, drool flew down from the dragon's lips again as he muttered that he still wasn't enough. With a wild look, Huracan asked where he could find more food. More food? I don't know, the girl thought, putting her finger to her chin. But suddenly she fell silent, as if remembering how she could help the scaly one. And then a soft smile of realization spread across her lips. It seems there is one very tasty delicacy, the girl answered slyly with a haughty smile. Meanwhile, in the rocky outskirts of the city of Front, it was 7 hours and 34 minutes. Kate looked at the time tab and was already angry. John was 4 minutes late. She remembered the previous conversation with the hero when she clearly told him the time. And then she turned to face him and threatened to kill him if he was even a second late. Panties, puppy! I told you I'd kill you if you were late! The heroine hissed furiously. Suddenly she heard a sound behind her and turned around with the veins on her face pulsating angrily. Why the hell are you late, brat? The girl screamed furiously. But in front of her she found not a half-naked student, but a monster. This is how the 24th level character Love met him for the first time. Huracan, aka the lost head of Eurus level 999, stood in front of him with his mouth full of saliva. Some time ago in a frontline village before it was reduced to a handful of ashes. Among the crowd of players there was one who was muttering obscenities with his head down. He was the supreme commander of the alliance of the 5 largest guilds. The same man who in the past shot the hero through and through with an arrow from a blue bow. And now it was none other than the once majestic Hawkeye. Formerly a top player in Chrono Life and the supreme commander of the World Guild Alliance. His appearance on any stage was always accompanied by a unique and stunning charisma. He had no equal. However, everything changed when, after the end of the World Alliance of Guilds was disbanded. And his commander-in-chief hit rock bottom after taking all the blame and responsibility for it. I am Hawkeye. I am the supreme commander, the man muttered under his breath. I used to have all the guilds at my feet. I couldn't fall so low, he grumbled tiredly. However, his tirade was suddenly interrupted by an explosion in the house directly opposite. People became agitated, immediately panicking to find out what was happening and why the village was no longer a safe zone. Hawkeye heard part of the conversation and raised an eyebrow, slightly skeptical and questioning. That day, he witnessed a scene that resulted in most of the players being removed. He managed to hide behind the nearest wall, watching as Huracan absorbed the player's energy. What the hell is this? Hawkeye exclaimed mentally. Lilith immediately noticed his shadow flickering behind the nearby wall out of the corner of her eye. A sly, arrogant smile instantly spread across her lips. Hawkeye then heard the goddess of life praise the dragon for destroying the village. I saw sticky saliva dripping from the saber-toothed mouth, and the phrase that Huracan is not enough. how the one-horned scaly dragon then asked for more food for himself. The girl came up with an idea where the wish of the second head of Eurus could be fulfilled, and they soared upwards above the burning remains of tiles and wooden walls of houses. Huracan took off again in a purple halo of fire, and the girl, surrounded by golden light, followed him. Hawkeye was left standing in that alley all alone. He stood around the corner with an unreadable expression on his face, the bulletin board tab open in front of him. He thought about what had happened for a while, sweating from the adrenaline in his blood. Then, his trembling lips curved into a strange semblance of a half-smile. The man laughed loudly and furiously, a maddened expression on his face. Meanwhile, Hurricane stood in front of Kate, and Lilith soon landed behind him. Kate looked at him in surprise and felt a strange anxiety in her chest. She still couldn't remember who this player was, and whether there was such a monster on this island. "Nice to meet you. You're Boss Love, aren't you?" The goddess of life smiled welcomingly. "Wait, only Panties calls me that. Do you know him?" Kate visibly relaxed and exhaled after the stranger's words. "Hey, I almost hit you. Why is your character design so scary?" the heroine complained, addressing the dragon. Lilith watched this silently with a forced smile, while irritation was visible in her eyes. Suddenly, she asked if Love was close with a guy named Panties, to which the girl was a little confused at first. "We actually just started playing together." "I don't like that clingy one at all, but he insisted," Kate exclaimed, feeling her cheeks warm up. Lilith stood opposite with an increasingly gloomy expression on her face. Her lips no longer even curved into a benevolent smile, and there was an undisguised shadow of anger on her face. She remembered how, after Mr. King's merciless murder, she was so angry that she didn't even ask the reason why he broke the contract. She then killed Mr. Kim as well, still feeling the anger boiling inside her. And even regaining her status as the goddess of life did not make her happy, but she remembered the hero's words about a certain Boss Love. And now, the reason for her bad mood was right in front of her, so Lilith couldn't help but say, "How annoying you are." "What?" was all the unsuspecting Kate managed to stammer. At that very moment, the girl was surrounded by tentacles from all sides, instantly absorbing her strength. Dark, dirty blood spurted from her throat, her eyes widening in sudden pain and panic. The tentacles were much larger this time, sucking much more power out of her than a normal player. "Please die, overrated girl." And again, Lilith's lips curved into the most charming smile. Blood and dust filled the air around. The dragon left no living place on the heroine. When it was all over, all that was left of her body was her beloved blue scarf, which had fallen alone on the grass. Huracan was filled with power. Now his aura became much stronger and more terrifying than it was before. "What I ate was very tasty," the dragon exclaimed with a smile full of saliva. "Of course it's delicious. She's a piece of God," Lilith replied, extremely pleased with herself. "A piece of God?" the scaly one asked the girl, turning to face her. "Oh, okay. Don't bother your head with that." The goddess of life smiled even wider and haughtily. She demonstratively stepped on the fabric with her heel, deliberately staining it with dirt and dust. "Would you like to go for a walk to taste even more delicacies?" Lilith suggested to the dragon as if nothing had happened. "Where are you both going?" The hero's voice was deliberately quiet and angry. John stood behind his opponents, his eyes shadowed by his bangs. However, if you looked closely, you could see the pure rage that burned in his eyes. Lilith's face immediately changed. A blush appeared on her cheeks, and her lips curved into a satisfied smile. "Long time no see, Mr. Loser. How are you doing?" the goddess asked casually. But the guy shut her up with one phrase. "You'd better get your dirty pig's hooves out of the way if you don't want to die a cruel death," John hissed angrily. Lilith looked down and realized he was talking about the chart she was still standing on. "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't step on purpose," she babbled innocently and took a step back. However, where her heel had been, there was now a dirty, crumpled mark left. The hero's eyes filled with animalistic fury as he followed her with his gaze. But suddenly the guy turned his attention to Huracan. "Hey, you! With the tentacles!" He swung his wooden club, his eyes flashing with anger, and hissed that he would start by beating him. A bright golden beam with different edges pierced the space in front of John. The one-horned dragon was immediately illuminated by a golden light, and he opened his mouth almost in amazement. The light from the beam again flew beyond the planet, piercing a part of the universe. The hero stood silently around the gradually fluttering columns of dust, smoke, and ash, the club still lying in the direction of the blow. "Crazy cockroach, I'm giving you one last chance to crawl away with your heels flashing," the guy said hostilely. He said this to Lilith, but she seemed completely unimpressed by his threat. "Oh my god, is there such a beautiful cockroach like me? And stop pretending to be strong." the goddess laughed. When she added with a grin that the guy couldn't kill her, John frowned even more. Finish your work first because the enemy is right in front of you, Lilith grinned smugly. Behind the goddess of life cutting through the clouds, Huracan was already flying towards the hero, ready to strike back. And the scaly one flew at an incredibly fast speed, and within a few seconds it was already a meter away from the enemy. The one-horned dragon approached, sharpening its claws, to the delighted cry of the girl, "This is my son!" And when Huracan flew as close as possible, he cut with his claws at the place where the hero was, leaving columns of dust. The explosion of dirt and air was like a tsunami, covering John completely. "Master," Urus called out to him in fear, searching through the thin air. "I was already surprised," exclaimed the hero, whose silhouette began to appear from behind the layer of fog. "Who is he that he could survive my blow?" the boy asked, placing the club behind his back, while a scar from the dragon's claws was adorned on his torso. Although Urus immediately asked excitedly if everything was okay with John, he didn't feel any pain at all. When his stomach began to twist, the wound instantly healed and his health points were replenished at the same time. Then Huracan spoke up, soaring above the hero, and answering that there was nothing complicated, he simply dodged. "Your attack didn't even reach me," added the dragon, who showed no signs of damage. John looked at him, paused for a few seconds, and thought about what was happening. "So you dodged it? Then I'll swing harder next time," he added, scratching the back of his head. In response to this phrase, the scaly one suddenly frowned and narrowed his black eyes. "What a disgusting bluff. You say you didn't hit with full force?" the dragon asked. However, the hero countered with a question, "At full strength? All my punches so far have been normal, I haven't even tried," John added. He remembered dozens of times when he had pierced the planet with one blow, illuminated the corners of the universe, and all this was not the maximum of possibilities. A bright golden pillar of light surrounded the boy, causing his cloak to flutter upwards. This time, Huracan was truly surprised, watching what was happening from the front row. John activated the Sword Spirit's special skill through the sword rune in his arsenal. However, when the activation was successful, the system notified that the swordsman's skill could only be used once. It didn't matter to the boy. The rune was against his torso, adding strength to the attack when he timed the blow. "Hey, look closely, little cockroach," the hero addressed the dragon, remembering how Lilith called him her son. "Right now, I'm using the skill for the first time, and at full power," the boy hissed, piercing his opponent with a determined look. Scaly gritted his teeth, his eyes blazing with newfound bestial anger. And John had already prepared his wooden club, grabbing it in his hand, engulfed in lightning. "Activating the skill Continuous Slash," the guy cried out, getting into a fighting stance. He looked up at Huracan and at that moment finally swung his wooden stick. The force of the golden fire strike flew through the planet and moved further. The inertia from the impact was so strong that it was rapidly approaching the planet opposite. John recalled pleasant moments meeting his boss, Love. Meanwhile, the golden beam moved closer and closer to the opposite planet. The boy remembered how Kate made him walk on eggshells and commanded him left and right, how she joked about his nickname, Panties, when they would chat for hours in the hunting grounds. Of course, how Kate beat him at every opportunity, no matter how much he had done wrong. The force of the impact was a couple of meters before reaching the planet's space. But Kate smiled so beautifully when she wasn't angry and wasn't pretending to be a pompous teacher. John's rage knew no bounds. Now, all these moments were worth nothing. She was so angry at their last meeting, but she still waited for him, and the hero was late again, which cost her her life in the game. Huracan could barely see anything through the blinding force of either the blow or the boy's anger. And suddenly the bright light became much brighter, erasing everything that the scaly one could barely see. The shockwave circled the planet and closed around it from two opposite sides. Suddenly, the golden light began to fade away, leaving the space object intact. When the trace of the beam had almost dissipated, the planet remained intact for another few seconds. And suddenly, a bright light began to break through literally from inside the cosmic ball. The rays became more and more numerous. A massive, loud explosion echoed throughout the universe with a blinding flash. But that was not the end. The golden glow spread even more. The flash became brighter. And then, in place of the planet, there remained a patch of snow-white space, peeking out through the yellow remains of the explosion. But just a few more seconds, and in that very space there was nothing left except white expanse and small fragments of the planet. Thus, John mastered the basic swordsman skill, Continuous Slash, which continuously cuts the enemy. The broadcast tab said it was about to start. With a distinctive sound, the recording changed to the on-air button, instantly notifying all viewers. Hawkeye went live from somewhere not far from the district, among the trees. "Hello everyone. I am Hawkeye, Supreme Commander of the World Guild Alliance," the man began in a serious voice. The audience began to grow, and despite the player's firm tone, the others commented on him with undisguised ridicule. Initially, broadcast mode is a built-in feature for in-game broadcasts. It can be used by any user in the game, but during the Doomsday, the World Alliance of Guilds did not do this in order to successfully complete the raid operation. To this day, the identity of the wanted mass murderer has still not been determined. Smiling nervously and a little tensely, the man suggested getting straight to the point. Hawkeye asked if it was possible for one man to stand against 3 million without cheating, and the audience also found this absurd. Of course, I saw the bulletin board where the company said it was not a bug or a hacker, but how can you trust them? He paced back and forth and reasoned. Especially when the game company sees players as nothing but dogs and pigs. The man suddenly cried out with an expression on his face that scared even the users. "Look at the commotion on the bulletin board. A monster that deletes characters? What nonsense is this?" Hawkeye was indignant. "I'm tracking this monster right now and inviting all the characters I deleted to join the stream," he exclaimed. The audience grew in number, and Hawkeye continued that he would make a full disclosure and reveal the truth hidden in the gaming company. Then the man suddenly stopped in place, as if remembering something important. "Don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications," he finally added enthusiastically, causing laughter on the other side. Meanwhile, among the rocks, the windy hurricane from the blow that had passed was dispersing. John stood amidst the swirling clouds of dust and wind, still holding his club in a firing position. He looked up at his opponent and snorted stubbornly. "You are amazing," the hero hissed, almost with admiration, looking at the still living dragon. "I can't believe you dodged all the blows." "Where did you come from?" the guy asked with genuine curiosity. Hurakan was breathing heavily, crippled by a strong blow from the club. His whole body was smoking, and blood was flowing from the eye on his chest. "My name is Hurakan, and my only goal is to destroy humanity," the scaly one muttered in a hoarse growl. Realization dawned on Urus when the dragon added that he was the strongest boss and his previously lost head. Urus quietly noted that he had not imagined it, and that he felt something familiar. He immediately remembered how he had felt a familiar, yet ominous aura a long time ago. And then he told John to be careful, because this bastard could be behind the disappearance of monsters in the Valley of the Dead. And then he quietly and hesitantly, as if afraid to say it out loud, said that this one could also be guilty of Captain Love's death. This assumption struck the guy to the depths of his soul, which is why he no longer heard the subsequent words of his companion. Meanwhile, the dragon watched the dialogue between John and Urus. Unable to bear it any longer, he growled that he would kill them all together, and at once. With loud cries, he rushed towards the ground, preparing to strike. Urus continued and continued to speak as if they had not noticed the enemy approaching them. After listening to his companion, John fell silent for a moment, and then asked again, as if he didn't believe it. The guy's eyes lost their sparkle as he said resignedly that Love's character had been removed. He then quickly swung his hand, meeting the enemy's blow with his club, causing an explosion. The explosion thundered throughout the area, alerting everyone to their location, and Hawkeye was walking through the forest and couldn't help but notice it. And then he quickly ran towards the explosion, continuing to stream, and the viewers supported him in every way. Meanwhile, John continued to swing his club. He struck again, but not fatally, causing another bright flash. The dragon's body could not withstand such blows, even though they were not fatal, and blood spurted from its mouth. But he still did not give up, and again decided to attack the guy who was standing right in front of him. But John didn't back down either and decided to use a non-lethal strike, a version of a continuous cut. The guy began to swing the baton with quick hand movements, striking the opponent's body. The impact was so powerful that the recoil caused a cloud of dust behind the dragon. The dragon's body couldn't take it anymore. Blood spurted out of his mouth again, his face twisted in pain. Hawkeye finally reached the clearing where the battle was taking place and stood behind a tree, watching. Users immediately began asking who was fighting with whom, while others noted that the battle was simply brutal. But suddenly, one of the users noticed that one of the opponents looked very familiar. Hawkeye could have agreed, but was in shock. A wanted poster with a familiar face on it immediately flashed in his mind. The chat exploded with shocked exclamations when everyone recognized the man who caused the end of the world. Hawkeye immediately remembered all his grievances against the guy. He waved his hand, and a flash of light appeared on his palm. Gritting his teeth, the man began to pull back the bowstring, thinking that he simply could not believe that he had met the worst enemy in the worst place at the worst time. Uraraka and John continued to fight. The explosions from the boys' blows continued to thunder and sparkle, while Hawkeye aimed an arrow at them. Meanwhile, the dragon's horn broke, and another portion of black blood burst from its mouth. Hawkeye and his stream viewers froze, asking what that glitter was. Suddenly, one of the viewers exclaimed that his character had been resurrected, and everyone immediately stared at the message in disbelief. While the man was in shock, more and more viewers began to respond that their characters had been resurrected, and they began to log into the game. Hurakan received a message that the stolen souls were returned to their owners. His level was reduced. Hurakan stood weakly on the ground, pressing his hand to his other hand, which was bruised. His level had indeed dropped, and he was now 723. John asked his opponent what was wrong with him. He was so good at dodging his attacks, so why was he slowing down now? Urus said that the energy he had absorbed had now returned to its original owners. One of the game's development staff exclaimed that he now realized that the player's data had not been deleted, but had been moved to the Horn of Hurakan, to which the director responded without much enthusiasm that this was indeed the case. Why hadn't he realized it right away? The man replied that he was not a development employee, but the head of design. John, hearing this news, noticeably cheered up and, smiling, asked again. And then he noted that, if that was the case, then if he completely destroyed this bastard, then Captain Love would return. Hurakan angrily clenched his teeth, making grunting sounds. Exclaiming that the boy was nothing more than a worthless meal, he rushed forward again. However, John met the enemy's blow with even greater zeal, and everything around was illuminated by fire from the explosion. Reports quickly began to emerge that Hurakan had been downgraded. Hawkeye continued to watch this battle without trying to do anything. Many messages about this battle appeared on the bulletin board. Some praised John, some on the contrary. In any case, everyone was glad that their characters returned. Hawkeye slowly lowered his hand with the bow down, and then he stood up resignedly, staring at the ground. Meanwhile, someone was watching the fight between John and Hurakan on the phone from the stream. As it turned out, it was Kate, sitting on her bed at home. Everyone in the chat was cheering for John, who kept on hitting and hitting Hurakan. Kate immediately remembered how, when they first met, John had joyfully run towards her. How naively he asked him to teach him something. Meanwhile, a huge column of smoke rose into the air. Hurakan fell to the ground, exhausted, on his knees. His level was 180. He seemed to be conscious. Foam was coming out of his mouth. John and Urus began to laugh evilly. The second noticed that Hurakan had returned to his original state, because all the energy had left his body, and the guy noticed that his appearance spoke for itself. Standing over the fallen dragon, John asked if they should call it a day. But, as it turned out, Hurakan was not unconscious after all. After a couple of minutes, he finally said something quietly, and then a shoot from his body, passing on the tail of a scorpion, with its sharp end dug into John's body. Everyone watched with bated breath to see what would happen next, and Hurakan exclaimed that he was a creature that would destroy humanity. The dragon's appendage began to suck the energy out of the guy's body with greedy gulps, and after a few minutes the guy's body turned into a cloud of dust. There have been reports that Hurakan has absorbed the target. John's club, for lack of anyone nearby, fell to the ground with a dull thud. The dragon's horn began to grow and lengthen again. Hurakan began to burst into loud, eerie laughter, which made him look like a madman. Raising his head to the sky, he exclaimed that it was very, very tasty, and that it was the first time he had eaten something so tasty. His level was back to 999, but then he exclaimed that even that wasn't enough for him. His saliva dripped onto the ground as he said that he could never satisfy all his hunger, because he was a glutton, Hurakan. Urus fell powerlessly to the ground next to John's club. Bitter tears streamed down his cheeks. But suddenly, a message appeared that the hidden skill healing factor had been activated, thanks to which damaged body parts would be restored. And after that, Hurakan's belly swelled up. Unable to bear such pain, as if something was tearing him apart from the inside, Hurakan screamed loudly. And something, or rather someone, really tried to break free from the dragon's body. Someone's face became visible under the dragon's skin. With a dull, terrifying laugh, the head began to creep upward, the neck becoming longer and longer. And then this head turned towards Hurakan to look at him, and it let out a more distinct laugh. It was unclear whether it was more from pain or from fear, but Hurakan screamed even louder than before, and tears welled up in his eyes. At the game's headquarters, everyone present was still watching this in shock. Urus and Hawkeye scrunched up their faces in disgust and shock and wondered what it was. Lilith, meanwhile, was hovering in the air with the help of her wings and was also watching. However, her reaction was somewhat different from the others. She was rather surprised and amused. Everyone continued to laugh. The head noticed that it was so funny, he felt like a worm. His neck continued to stretch out. Urus flew up to the head and asked her if it was John, to which he replied that it was him. Huracan again spoke about the fact that he is a creature that exists for the sake of killing all people. He shouted even louder that he was the insatiable glutton Huracan. John lowered his face to Huracan's and mockingly asked him about this and that. Something began to rise from Huracan's belly up John's neck with a nasty gurgling sound. And then the guy's body returned to normal, but Huracan's body began to deplete until it turned into something like a deflated balloon. As it turned out, this was the effect of the healing factor, enhanced recovery, which guaranteed immediate healing. When activated, the absorbed cells would return to the original owner. However, most of them have already merged with the cells of Huracan, because of which Huracan was also absorbed by the healing factor. John burped, exhaling purple smoke from his mouth. And after absorbing Huracan, John acquired the hidden skill Gluttony, which absorbs all the characteristics and level of the target when eaten. Lilith, drawing attention to herself, asked John if he was finished already. And then, quietly chuckling, she noted that she had expected something like this, but it was quite funny. John noticed that she looked happy, even though he had killed her son, and then called her a cockroach mother, to which the woman became somewhat pouty and responded with an offended expression that he was so rude. Lilith sighed and said that it was figurative. Did he really think that she gave birth to him? And then she said that she was only 21, which meant that they were the same age. John was a little scared that the woman knew such information about him, so he decided to ask her how she knew how old he was. Lilith, instead of answering, waved her hand, and her staff began to shine in her palm like a bright flash. Feathers were scattered everywhere, and the stone that was on the top of the staff began to shine brightly in the sun. Lilith grinned and replied that she didn't know. It was just a guess. And then she waved her staff and a rift began to shine in the sky. A few moments later, terrible sounds were heard from the rift, followed by huge claws. But nothing stopped there, and someone's huge clawed paw, covered in black skin, reached forward. With a light movement, Lilith landed on this hand, clicking her heels. Turning around, she said goodbye to John, saying that they would see each other again. Meanwhile, the director threw his cigar on the floor and told his subordinates to finish up and then publish the article and organize a consolation event. And then he told them to continue watching as he had told them before. And he immediately remembered how casually he had asked whether Huracan had come out. He grinned and then said that it was funny. And then he ordered his subordinates to follow two characters from now on, Huracan and Lilith. The settlement near the battle site was almost completely destroyed. Houses were turned into ruins. It was incredibly quiet. But suddenly all the players present there raised their hands to the sky and let out a joyful cry. John entered the settlement through the main gate and was already met by a crowd shouting that he was a hero. From somewhere came the sound of trumpets, as if it were a real parade, and someone shouted for the residents of the frontline village and travelers to meet their hero. John did not object to this reception at all, but only smugly asked whether his secret and his power had really been revealed. And the live broadcast of Hawkeye reached the maximum number of viewers at the same time, which was 234,582 people, and clips from it took over various social networks. But suddenly someone came out of the crowd and shouted, asking the crowd why they continued to talk nonsense, why they considered this idiot their hero. Pointing angrily at John, the man continued, saying that this bastard is a mass murderer, an executioner. Doesn't everyone understand? Like he recently killed 3.8 million people? Still furious, he continued shouting, asking how horses could lick the feet of the most wanted criminal. And then, turning to John, he said that he was simply a role model for madmen. But suddenly Hawkeye intervened in this angry monologue, asking the man if killing a character was now equivalent to deleting him. And then he told him not to talk nonsense. The Supreme Commander of the World Guild Alliance, Hawkeye, became a popular streamer thanks to just one broadcast, and he benefited the most from this incident. And after that, he came up and started asking if John remembered him, shaking John's hand, which he held in his own. Hawkeye noticed that it seemed like their hero was working alone, without a guild, and then asked him if he wanted to join their guild, Justice. The crowd, hearing that John was not a member of the guild, became even more animated and began inviting him to join their guilds. People began to greedily and en masse approach the guy, wanting to take this strong hero for themselves. John decided to run away, but the crowd did not lose its fervor and ran after him, still shouting that he should join the guild. Eurus, laughing, noted that John had become quite popular and therefore should have revealed his power earlier, but the guy irritably shouted at him to shut up. He kept running until he hit his head on something. Jumping back, John immediately wondered what it was and how it ended up in the middle of the city. As it turned out, what the guy had stumbled upon was a life-size statue of himself, made of gold. Not believing his eyes, John asked if it was really him, to which Urus remarked that it couldn't be otherwise, and then pointed to the clothes on the statue. Suddenly, someone came up to the guy from behind, happily asking the guy if he liked the statue. As it turned out, there were several men who were dressed very similarly to John. The man standing at the head was the Hallison Guildmaster, Mr. Wang, and he exclaimed that this statue was worth a lot of money. Mr. Van, turning to John, exclaimed that he liked his performance and, as he thought, he was the man. And John immediately remembered the man who asked him if he was the one who destroyed the top 5 guilds. Isn't he the one who killed 3 million players of the World Guild Alliance? Mr. Wang exclaimed that he was very impressed then, and that is why he erected such a statue. John was confused by this reaction, as well as the fact that they were all in their underwear, and so he asked about it. The man replied that they sold everything to build this statue because it cost more than 20 billion. Meanwhile, the crowd had already reached John, finally finding him, and so the guy began to run away again. Meanwhile, Kate was sitting on the bed, her head buried in her knees. She thought about how it was all so obvious, and why she hadn't realized it before, thanks to the mountains that had disappeared in the blink of an eye. How could she not understand when John killed the bear hair with one blow? How could she not understand when he returned the brass knuckles that the Hallison Guild had stolen? Kate wondered why he did that, why he pretended to be weak. Why did he deceive her? And the girl's face acquired a desperate expression, as if she had been betrayed. Memories from her childhood immediately flashed in her head. In front of her was her toy, which was torn, and she herself was sitting on the floor, also hugging her knees to her chest. Tears were flowing from her eyes. She was scared. The girl's eyes widened in anger as a voice screamed in her head that she had been betrayed. Kate reached for her glasses, which were lying on the bed next to her, and she put them on with shaking hands. Her whole body was shaking violently, and the voice in her head did not subside, which made her shrink even more. Meanwhile, John was walking along the streets, saying that the crowd had finally calmed down, and then asked if all famous people really lived like this. Urus noticed that many eyes were also turned towards him, to which the guy replied that he should ignore them. And then the guy noticed that it seemed to him that he had forgotten something, and this something was very important. But suddenly he discovered that Love was standing in front of him. John immediately ran up to Love with a joyful smile, asking her if she had already resurrected, because he wondered where the emptiness came from. But it turned out it simply wasn't there. The crowd couldn't help but notice that their hero was calling someone a boss, and so they became interested in the girl. The girl's face was dark, and people began to notice that she reminded them of someone. John, meanwhile, put his hand under his cloak, saying that he had something for the girl. And then, with a joyful smile that never left his face, he began to tie the girl's scarf around her neck. And then he said that he found it after Huracan's death, but immediately corrected himself, saying that he picked it up on the way, and he thought that he was still hiding his power from Love. However, the girl's face became even more distorted, and her eyes began to shine with unkind lights. Her body began to tremble, and she said in a shaking voice that it was all a lie. And then she asked him why he had lied to her. Awkwardly scratching the back of his head, John began to say that he didn't understand what she was talking about, because he couldn't lie. But this only made Kate even more angry. She clenched her teeth until they creaked. And then she asked him in a quiet voice whether it was he who gave her the rice cake back then. Continuing this game, John asked her what she was talking about. But suddenly a realization struck him, and memories immediately flashed through his head. The guy froze, his eyes wide open, his mouth slightly open in surprise. He looked at the girl, not believing that she was the one he had given that cake to back then. Love admitted that she is Kate. After a while, Kate's manager yelled at her for revealing her identity in front of so many people. Was she crazy? The woman screamed that Kate was now the hottest topic on the internet. Dozens of magazines were just dying to interview her, and unfounded rumors were spreading everywhere. And besides, she also made a character to match her appearance. In the game, you can change the skin of the game character. However, according to government policy, in virtual reality games, the player's appearance must match the appearance of his character. The woman screamed that the girl could at least change her hairstyle, and it was a miracle that she had not been recognized earlier. Kate asked what difference it made that they knew her, since she didn't even plan to hide her passion. Angry, she screamed, asking if playing was a sin, and why should she hide. She exclaimed that she plays games for fun, so why should she think about other people? The manager sighed and replied that her image could be destroyed, and then she asked if she had forgotten that she was pretending to be in front of the public. But this question angered the girl even more, and she gritted her teeth. Tears welled up in her eyes as she screamed that she never wanted to wear that mask. She made her do it. But she immediately said that she didn't want to lie, that she hated deceiving her fans. And then the girl disappeared into her room, slamming the door loudly. The manager quietly muttered that this girl was simply unbearable. Running into the room, Kate immediately grabbed the virtual reality glasses. She fell onto the bed and put her glasses on her head, still gritting her teeth. The game's launch announcements were heard, and the girl's hands, which had been shaking before, now stopped. The connection to the game was complete, and Kate was already lying calmly on the bed, preparing to dive into the game. But somewhere in the subcortex of her consciousness, her memories from the deep action awakened. When she was in kindergarten, she often sang songs. Her voice sounded childish, but still beautiful. The children sat on the floor and listened to Kate singing. They couldn't take their eyes off each other, completely captivated by the singing and Kate herself. Kate discovered her talent for singing as a child and made an amazing debut at the age of 5. Everyone called her a real genius in talent. Admiring this little girl, they called her the Singer from Paradise, Reborn, and many other different names. Her debut was the most brilliant and attracted many people to her concerts. However, the tragedy seemed to be waiting for the right moment, and this beautiful flower bud was trampled by vile adults. He was trampled by those who were supposed to protect her parents. And money is to blame for this, and some might say that this is common in the entertainment industry. But for the little girl, it became a tragedy, as if she had turned into the hero of a sappy drama. And so Kate was loaded with work. She was loaded with various music programs, talk shows, commercials, and much more. She managed a schedule that was too much for even adults, which oddly enough was because of her parents. They asked her what was wrong with her because she could do better. There was a greedy, almost predatory expression on their faces when they talked about how they still loved her. Kate felt bad, but she forced herself to smile no matter what. She learned to hide her bad emotions, lighting everything up with her bright smile. However, one day her small body reached its limit. When she was giving another concert, Kate suddenly felt that it was hard for her to breathe. Her face was flushed, her eyes darted nervously, and this was a special broadcast at the end of the year, the highest ratings ever. An impressive final performance. It was weighing on her. And, unable to withstand the pressure, Kate fell on the stage and then vomited. With tears and drooling, Kate raised her head, calling out for her parents. They stood aside, making no attempt to reach their daughter. Their faces were distorted with anger and disappointment. The girl burst into tears even more than before, and thus she received the deepest scar on her heart. After entering the game, Kate reached the cliff and sat on its edge, bringing her knees to her chest. She immediately remembered John tying her scarf around her neck. The girl's hand involuntarily reached out to squeeze this scarf. Suddenly, someone from behind her exclaimed that he had finally found her, causing the girl's eyes to widen in surprise. Turning around, she saw John standing behind her. With a worried expression on his face, he said that he had guessed that she would be here, and then asked her why she had suddenly run away. But the girl interrupted the guy, rudely telling him to get lost, and then she hid her face in her knees, and John stood there dumbfounded. John whispered to Eurus, asking him what was wrong with love, to which he replied that he thought she was angry with him. And then the guy asked him why she was angry with him. Sighing, Eurus noted that John did not understand women at all. And then he explained that love was angry because he hid his power from her. Continuing to whisper, the guy asked what he should do then, to which Eurus replied that he should apologize, ask for forgiveness for his lie. Hearing this, John cleared his throat awkwardly, and then, looking away and blushing slightly, he hesitantly apologized. He said that he had never wanted to deceive her in the first place. He continued by saying that he had wanted to tell her everything one day, but he could not find the right moment. Love remained silent, clutching the scarf around her neck and her fingers. And then she slowly stood up, asking the guy if he really thought that his one apology would fix everything. When Love got to her feet, her back was still turned to John, and she noticed that he had simply apologized. John scratched the back of his head and awkwardly asked her what she meant. But before the girl could answer, some flying monster grabbed her and carried her away. This monster turned out to be a creature that had the features of a lion and a bird. There was a man sitting on the monster's back, his blue eyes shining brightly, his white braid fluttering in the wind, and he asked Love if he had grabbed her too abruptly. Holding the reins in his hands, the man noted with a smile that the girl should not have lost consciousness. Eurus also froze in amazement, but this happened because he recognized this man. Enraged, John shouted, asking the kidnapper who he was, and then ordered him to come down. However, the man smiled and replied that he could not, because there were people who wanted to meet Kate, and so he borrowed her for a while. John became even more enraged and took out his club to strike the stranger. But Urus, stopping him, shouted that he could not attack him so thoughtlessly. However, the guy did not listen to his companion at all, but only waved his hand, delivering a vertical blow. A bright flash of fire shot straight into the sky towards the stranger and his monster. However, the stranger only exhaled and smiled. He raised his hand, which was wrapped in bandages so that the skin was not visible, and was about to use the skill 8 panoramas, 8 mirrors. The man used the 5th panorama, reflection, and a shield appeared in front of him, reflecting the attack. And now this bright flash of fire flew straight towards John. Having hit the ground, the flash traveled even further, destroying everything in its path. The impact was so strong that it passed through the entire atmosphere straight into outer space. John stood just a few centimeters away from the furrow that had appeared from the blow, his cloak half destroyed. Urus immediately flew up to John with alarmed cries. The game informed the guy that he had received a critical injury. The hidden skill, healing factor, was activated, and John's arm, which was torn off by the reflected blow, began to recover. Flying closer and realizing that there was no reason to worry, Urus said that now the guy should have realized that his opponent was not an ordinary person. And then he said that this man's name is Harris, and he is the god of water. There was a slight smile on Harris's face that expressed his superiority, and Urus noted that he was a creature of the same kind as he. Hearing this, John turned to Urus and asked him if, since they were creatures of the same kind, he was such a weakling. But suddenly there was a quiet but very noticeable crack. Harris looked in surprise at the hexagonal object lying on his lap. Smiling, the man said that the guy was really amazing because he was the only one who could break it, besides that person, and it would take a long time to fix it. But this incident only seemed to amuse Harris, and he said that an ordinary man like John did not deserve to have a piece of God. Meanwhile, Lav was unconscious, blood dripping from the corners of her lips. After some time, Harris carried the girl on his griffin to the western forest, to a hidden tower. When Love woke up, she jumped to her feet and immediately asked the man what it was and who he was. Taking a defensive stance, the girl screamed, asking the man what was going on and why she had been brought here. Harris raised his hands in a calming gesture and said that he did not want to cause any harm, someone just wanted to meet Miss Kate. And right after these words, 2 people dressed in dark cloaks entered the room. Having seen the faces and figures of these people, Kate froze with her mouth slightly open. An expression of fear appeared on her face. As it turned out, these people were the girl's parents. They smiled softly at her. After that failure at the concert, Kate decided to end her singing career. However, some people could not accept this at all, and Kate's mother came into her room and hit her daughter in the face. The woman knelt down in front of her daughter, who was lying on the floor, not wanting to let her deprive them of their income. Smiling softly, the woman called her daughter and then asked her if she still didn't understand the reason for their actions. The girl's body was shaking. Her eyes were darting around in fear, and tears were flowing from her eyes. Her cheek was already beginning to swell from the blow, when the woman said that they were doing this because they loved her very much. And so for many years, Kate could not end her career. When the income dried up completely, Kate's parents finally crossed the line. These people who do not deserve to be called parents sold their only child. Realizing what was happening, the girl rushed forward and knocked down one of her customers. It was a miracle that she was able to escape, and the place she ran to was the police. Kate, sobbing, told the officers what had happened to her, and thus she was freed from the hell that had tormented her for many years. By court order, Kate's parents were deprived of parental rights. They wanted to reduce the sentence, but of course it didn't work. Thanks to the law, Kate was completely freed from them, but this could not heal her broken psyche. From that day on, she did not leave her room. She escaped from the real world into the worlds of online games. She sat alone for days on end in her dark room. Her eyesight rapidly deteriorated, and so she was prescribed glasses. Memories of those terrible days made Kate anxious about taking them off, and the day when she will come out into the world again will be told a little later. Meanwhile, as if obeying forgotten instincts, Kate's body began to shake again, and she asked them about the restraining order. Smiling, Kate's father replied that they were in the game, and they saw an article about her playing Chrono Life. Then Kate asked how they found her, to which the man replied that they had found this man in time, and he pointed to Harris. Harris smiled and said that there was no point in talking about it, and that he would step outside for a moment so that they could continue their conversation. With a bright flash, Harris dissolved into thin air and disappeared. Left alone, Kate's mother noted that their daughter had grown up so much they had only seen her on TV, and so they were pleased to meet her even like this. She said that the world is so cruel. How could the court separate parents from their dear child? Kate felt her breathing become difficult. Cold sweat ran down her face, and she clenched her teeth, saying nothing. And then she, still uncertainly but in a harsher voice, asked them why they had come again, and if she was not there, then she would leave the game. Kate's mother replied that they had come to ask for forgiveness. She said that they were cruel that time, and all this time they wanted to apologize. She said that they were very sorry. With hope on her face, the woman asked if she would forgive them, and if it was possible, if they could return to those happy times together again. Harris stood outside in the bright sun, his griffin sleeping on the ground. Opening one eye, the man sighed, noticing that someone was standing nearby, and he asked him if he had already arrived. And of course, the one who came was John with Urus. Harris noted that the Oblads were unaware of this place, and so he believed that Urus had shown the way. The man continued to say something, but John did not listen to him and told him to shut his mouth. His face twisted in anger as he told him that he could beat him as much as he wanted because he would not rest until he took revenge. Harris smiled indulgently again and exhaled, then snapped his fingers, saying that nothing could be done about it then. Reacting to the sound, the griffin rose from the ground, emitting loud cries. Spreading its feathers, the monster soared into the sky, towering over the men. John swung his club and noted that it looked like this bird's head would get the first one. And then he asked how this bird dared to do something so impudent. But before the guy could finish speaking, he was surprised to discover that there were already 2 griffins in the sky. John grimaced and rubbed his face, not believing his eyes. There were now even more griffins in the sky, making it seem as if they covered the entire sky. With his hand extended with 4 fingers raised, Harris cast the quadruple panorama spell, photocopy. With furious cries, the entire horde of griffins rushed at John. Before he could think of anything better, the guy started swinging his club. A huge column of fire immediately shot into the sky, engulfing several griffins. The fire died down, and only a little ash remained in the sky. But in place of the old griffins, new ones appeared with bright flashes. Taken aback, John exclaimed, asking what it was, to which Urus replied that it was a photocopy, the skill of Harris's 4th mirror. And then he warned the guy, telling him to be careful, because Harris's mirror skill is a skill called 8 panoramas. There were many griffins flying in the sky when John said that he heard about it for the first time, to which Urus said that each panorama has different effects. The skill before, reflection, reflects all physical and magical attacks, in response to which John exclaimed, asking if there is balance in this damn game. Why is everyone here a cheater? Urus grimaced, saying that it was strange to hear that from a guy. And then he said that it doesn't really matter whether there is a balance or not, because the company didn't intend to maintain it in the first place. Urus said that all this is because he is not a player, but a boss monster that needs to be defeated. John sighed and noticed that in this interesting game, the boss just walked around the area and pretended to be human. John was about to continue, but before he could say anything else, a griffin attacked him from behind. A wound appeared on the boy's back and blood gushed from his mouth. The remaining griffins opened their beaks and began to form fireballs. But before they could release them, they were already burned in a column of fire. Ash clouds appeared in the air again. And again, in place of the old griffins, new ones appeared. Not wanting to lose, John swung his club furiously, striking the griffins multiple times. The guy's blows spread across the area in bright flashes, even flying into outer space. Harris's mirror made a cracking sound again. Harris looked at the mirror with even greater surprise than last time. John took advantage of the moment and put his club to Harris's neck. And then he mockingly asked if this thing was broken. And then he said that since he, like Urus, was also a weakling. Somewhat taken aback, Harris replied that the guy was probably just not normal, and then noted that he hadn't expected him to be so quick. John exclaimed irritably that this stupid smile did not suit the man. Because of it, he looked like a cockroach, meaning Lilith. And then the guy told Harris to talk if he wanted to live, and then he asked him why he kidnapped Boss Love, and what the God particle was. Scratching his cheek and smiling, Harris replied that he wasn't sure he should answer. Angered, John gripped his club even tighter and noticed that he looked like he wanted to die. Taking out the shining mirror, Harris noticed that it was almost broken, but it looked like he would be able to use it one last time. And then John heard someone step from behind and turned around, assuming that it would be a bird's head again. But, as it turned out, it was not a bird's head, but something similar to a man. He had a club in his hands and a cloak on his body. As it turned out, John's opponents now became himself, or rather his double. The clone took a stance preparing to deliver a punch, which he said backwards. And then, in a bright blue flash, the attack flew towards the real John. The attack was too fast, and so John didn't have time to react in any way, except to curse quietly. And the next moment, the guy's already low health dropped to 0. Harris stood a little to the side, watching the huge cloud of smoke that appeared after the blow from John's clone. The man didn't quite expect that the guy's clone would be so strong, and so he remarked that it was quite amazing, and if he had known about this in advance, he would have copied Mr. Hero from the very beginning. But then Eurus spoke up and asked Harris why he was doing all this. Turning around, Harris greeted Eurus with a slight smile, saying that they hadn't seen each other for so long, and then he apologized for not saying hello earlier. He was very busy. Remembering his comrade's previous appearance, the man noticed that he had become a little nicer now, to which Eurus irritably told him to shut up. In a firmer voice, Eurus told the man not to stray from the topic, and then he asked him why he was hanging around John. After thinking for a moment, he asked him if this was really an order from that man, to which Harris only smiled playfully. Changing the subject, Harris asked Eurus if he could squeeze his cheeks. But the next moment they heard a squelching sound under their feet, and looking down they discovered that there was some kind of lump of skin under their feet. The lump grew larger and larger, and the confused man asked what it was. Having prepared himself for a terrible sight, Eurus thought that this performance was starting again. The game announced that the healing factor had been activated, and now John's foot hit the ground with the same wet sound. His health level was rising, and rising as what only slightly resembled a human began to approach the frightened Harris. Something extended its hand, in the palm of which was a face, and this face greeted Harris. Unable to bear such a sight, the man screamed at the top of his lungs. Harris ran away in panic, while John's clone reached the clearing where John himself was. John, whose body still resembled a piece of plasticine, turned to greet his fake happily. Eurus, who had flown up, noticed that the guy himself now looked more like a fake, but an irritated John, whose face was still on his palm, ordered him to slam shut. The clone raised his hand again to strike, casting the spell backwards, and then a bright blue flash flew out from under his feet, heading straight towards the original. With a loud splash, John's body returned to its normal form, the black cloak reappearing on his shoulders as the flash moved closer and closer, breaking the ground in its path. John also grabbed his club to block the blow, using a vertical strike. The guy waved his hand, and before the blue flash of the clone's strike, a bright orange flash appeared. The energies of the blows met and, intertwining, rose into the air, where each tried to destroy the other. The clone and the original rushed forward to meet in close combat. Having reached the center of the clearing, they came together in a blow, causing a wave to spread around. Both boys activated their skills and swung their clubs, but neither of them gave up their positions, so they continued to strike each other blow after blow. The flashes of their strikes merged into a single bright flash that illuminated everything around for several kilometers ahead. The power of their forces was so great that, as they gathered, the energy from the blows rose into the air in a huge sphere. Being practically in the epicenter of this battle, Eurus screamed, hoping that he would not be blown away. Harris was also unpleasantly carried back, and then he joyfully exclaimed that they were now hitting each other with blows, and therefore they definitely wouldn't last long. Everything became quiet. The flashes of light died down, and smoke rose low along the ground, and when it cleared, 2 piles of leather could be seen. After activating the healing skill, the clone and John began to recover, which was not a very pleasant picture. Harris asked why, even if they were the same, they were restored in only one way. After a few moments, the boys' bodies returned to normal and they were ready to fight again. And the very next moment, they rushed from their places to once again engage in combat. Sighing, Harris told Eurus that they needed to clear up some misunderstandings, and then said that he had no interest in Mr. Hero. And then he said that his goal was just a piece of God. Upon hearing about the God particle, Eurus immediately assumed that it was Boss Love, and then he asked about it. However, Harris dispelled his assumptions with his loud laughter, asking the question again as if it were a funny joke. Having calmed down, he asked how some person could be something so worthy, and Kate was only the owner of a piece of God. Meanwhile, Kate's parents continued to apologize, but the girl did not look at them. Kate's mother looked at her daughter's hands and noticed that they were not shaking at all and were bare. The woman immediately rushed towards Kate and grabbed her hand. Making a creepy, greedy face, the woman argued with the girl about where the brass knuckles of silence were. Meanwhile, Eurus, having heard that Kate possessed a piece of God, asked if these were really the knuckle dusters that cost 10 million. Harris replied that it was not about price. For normal players, price might be a deterrent, but something else was more important. He explained that items in Chronolife were divided into different classes. The first, the most shameful, is the ordinary class. The second class is rare. The third class is unique. Well, the last one is the divine class, to which Kate's brass knuckles belong. Harris said that there was a superior class even higher, but he had never seen one like it, and Urus thought that he had seen it in John. Harris continued by saying that even if you ignore the strength and rarity, especially the peace of the gods, and the superior class is another matter, is prized by the gods. Meanwhile, Lilith sat on the grass and watched the explosions that thundered somewhere in the distance. As she chewed her sandwich, she noted sadly that Mr. Harris had indeed told everything earlier than he needed to. And then she said that men with long tongues were terrible. And then she turned to the creator, who was sitting next to her and also chewing a sandwich, and she asked him if he agreed with her. The man replied that there was nothing new in this, because many people had already guessed about it. And then he told Lilith that she also collected particles of God, and he reminded her of how she, pretending to be an ordinary player, went to the guild to get those very brass knuckles. But after that, the cooperation agreement was broken. Sighing, Lilith replied that, as expected, he knew about everything from the very beginning. The creator asked her if she expected Huracan to absorb the God particle, to which she replied that she did. She remained calm, but the result was different from what she expected. But suddenly another explosion thundered in the distance, which was even stronger than before. John and his clone continued to strike each other, but suddenly the clone's club passed from John's club forward and struck the guy's body. Harris, pleased with himself, noted that the characteristics and controls of John and his clone were identical, but there was an important difference. And these are the differences between the user and the game character. Unlike the human Mr. Hero, his copy does not make mistakes due to fatigue. Smiling, the man noted that this was exactly what changed the situation, in response to which Urus only groaned excitedly. And then, unable to bear it any longer, Urus anxiously rushed forward towards his comrade. Meanwhile, John was sitting on the ground, with a huge wound on his chest from which almost black blood was oozing. But soon the healing skill was activated again, and the wound on the guy's chest began to grow over with new tissue. Instead of irritation, a pleased expression appeared on the guy's face. He seemed to be in ecstasy from this, and he exclaimed that this was damn fun. The guy exclaimed that all the enemies died from one hit, which was damn depressing. And then he said that he didn't want to kill this fake, he wanted to continue playing with him. Even more agitated, Urus asked the guy what he was talking about. Wasn't he in the most terrible situation right now? Having already left, John stood up on his feet, and his clone began to approach him again. Without thinking twice, the clone jumped up, flying straight at his opponent. John smirked and said that there were two ways he could take down this weakling right now. This statement caused shock on the faces of everyone who watched this fight. Even the creator and Lilith were shocked. Meanwhile, John's club once again collided with the club of his fake. And again there was an explosion that illuminated everything around. Urus covered his face, trying to see what was happening behind the curtain of light and wind from the explosion. The blast wave even reached Lilith and the creator, and the woman grabbed her bangs to keep them from blowing away. Harris, smiling, repeated the guy's words once again that there were two ways to destroy his clone. The man noted that it was interesting, and even more interesting was how he would knock him down. Having recovered from the shock, Lilith began to eat her sandwich again, and she decided that the guy was bluffing. And she said that compared to other bosses in this game, Harris is just on another level. His 8 panorama is just a cheat skill. Smiling brightly in her old way, she smugly said that the guy couldn't get past this boss. He wouldn't be able to defeat him by any means. John finally said that the first way is to destroy the planet. And again, the guy's words made Lilith and the creator nervous, so much so that they even stopped eating. Continuing to take hits, the boy said that if he broke the game again like last time, Boss Love would return to the village and the fake would disappear. But then he said that it was too boring and that he should try something else. Hearing this, Lilith and the creator breathed a sigh of relief. The director, nervously gnawing his finger, begged the boy to choose the second method. Meanwhile, Kate's mother was still asking her daughter in the same sweet voice where her brass knuckles were, but her face was not distorted. She said that she wouldn't be angry, so her daughter could tell them everything. The woman said that Harris would pay them handsomely for the brass knuckles, and they weren't asking for real money, so it was nothing more than small change. With a bewildered expression on her face, the woman continued, telling Kate that they had given birth to her, so she should at least do this for them. Trying to pull her wrist out of the tenacious grip, Kate replied that she didn't know where the brass knuckles were. She had recently lost them. Then Kate's father decided to join the conversation, and, stomping loudly, he came closer. Hanging over the girl, he asked her with a terrifying face if she had hidden the brass knuckles. Tears immediately started to flow from Kate's eyes as she began to talk about how everything was wrong and she really didn't know where they were. But the man did not want to listen to this, and, waving his hand, he hit his daughter in the face. He kept shouting, blow after blow, that the girl was an ungrateful bitch, and yet they had tried so hard to accept her escape and move on with their lives. The sounds of blows echoed in the empty room, and along with them, the man's cries sounded about how she felt so sorry for letting her parents earn money. But without them, there would be nothing, and she paid for it in this way. The man was yelling, asking his daughter where their money was. Meanwhile, John was still fighting with his clone when suddenly a magic circle appeared under their feet. Covering one eye with his hand, Urus wondered what this light was, whether this was a new skill of the novice master. But then he discovered that it was Huracan's aura that the boy had absorbed. And then a huge appendage, similar to the one Huracan had, emerged from the guy's mouth. And then the sharp end of this appendage immediately dug into the back of John's clone. Slurping sounds began to be heard as the boy sucked the energy out of his clone's body. Noticing this, Harris sighed in relief, saying that he expected more, and then he asked the guy if he thought that his copy could also copy gluttony. And right after these words, a shoot also burst out of the clone John's throat. Flying forward, it sank its sharp end into the real John's chest. The slurping sounds of John and his clone merged as they tried to drain each other dry. Harris also noticed that the guy's opponent is his reflection. He also has the gluttony skill, as well as a high-performance battery, a healing factor. Harris closed his eyes and said condescendingly that the first method would have been more effective, but his strategy had failed. But in response, John simply decided to use a spare battery. And then a tendril was thrust into the chest of the unsuspecting Harris. The man's eyes widened in surprise and blood began to flow from his mouth. John, without looking away from his clone, turned his gaze to Harris and smugly said that his second attack was the destruction of the main body. Veins bulged on Harris's forehead as he frantically thought about how he had never thought the guy would release a second tentacle, and the first attack had only served as a distraction. And after just a few moments, the man's body was almost completely dry, and only muffled sighs came from his mouth. The clone, after weakening the main body of its caster, flashed with a bright flash and disappeared. John, continuing to suck in Harris's energy, said that the copy would disappear if its creator was dying, just as he thought. He looked at the man with a mixture of amusement, irritation, and self-satisfaction, said that it had been a lot of fun, and then said goodbye to him. Harris's skin slowly tightened over his bones as his strength faded, and the sounds that came out of his mouth grew even quieter. But the next moment, angry, the man clenched his teeth. He waved his hand in irritation, cutting off the end of the tentacle and freeing himself from this death. In his tightly leather-covered hand, John noticed his mirror, the edge of which was covered in blood. Harris, veins bulging on his forehead and a fierce gaze, looked at the guy, holding the mirror to himself. Smiling, he weakly said that the guy was a problem and he didn't expect to be cornered like that. And then he noticed that, no matter how unpleasant it was, he had no choice but to stop trying to get the brass knuckles of silence. The creator, who was still sitting in the clearing, asked whether Kate's God particle had been absorbed by Huracan, and whether Harris didn't know about it. Laughing, Lilith happily replied that he didn't know, because she hadn't told him. The man only silently marveled at this woman. Meanwhile, Harris's energy began to shine around his body, causing him to rise into the air and say goodbye to the guy. John let out a questioning sigh, and then his tentacle crawled back into his mouth. Having swallowed them, he said that he did not dare to leave because he, a loser, was not given the right to escape. Dripping in a cold sweat and breathing heavily, Harris smiled weakly and noted that lizards shed their tails to escape. And then something flew at the guy, but he managed to react and put his hand in front of himself. John looked at the object on his hand, which turned out to be a mirror. But Urus couldn't believe that Harris had given it away so easily. Harris told the guy to consider it a reward for clearing the raid, and while it's not a formal reward, he hopes he'll let him go. John said that he could not spare him for this because even more useful items would fall from his corpse, to which the man replied that this was a reasonable remark, and then annoyedly noted that even the devil could cry. Harris's body suddenly glowed with static, as he said that if he died, it would stop working, and so it would be more profitable to let him go alive. And then, after saying goodbye to the guy, Harris disappeared in a bright blue flash. John became the new owner of the mirror, and with an irritated sigh, he looked after the man. Looking away, he muttered quietly that so be it. Looking at the mountain a little further away, he said that his target was still Boss Love, and not the Mirror Man. Meanwhile, Kate's father continued to hit her in the face, screaming that she was an ungrateful bitch who had caused their suffering. He shouted that she should obediently obey her parents and not try to rebel. Kate meekly took the blows, unable to do anything, while the man shouted at her not to forget who gave her this life. Finally, the girl's legs gave out and she fell to the floor. Kate's father smiled wryly and, as if realizing something, said that they didn't need the brass knuckles of silence at all. Kate's parents smiled greedily and noted that they could now receive money directly from her. Kate looked up, thinking how tired she was of all this. Her eyes were empty and lifeless. Kate's mother noted that this was just a game, and therefore the court's injunctions did not apply here. Now she can't even escape from them. Beads of sweat ran down the girl's cheeks. Swollen from the blows, she clenched her teeth and fists. The parents smiled softly, as if nothing had happened, and said that now their family was together again forever. Tears began to flow from Kate's eyes as she mentally prayed for someone to help her, for anyone to save her, to rescue her from this hell. Suddenly a new voice was heard asking if they were really that stupid. As it turned out, it was John, who, lazily picking his nose, noticed that the girl might just stop playing. Kate's parents turned around at the sound of the voice and asked the boy who he was and how dare some rude guy interrupt them. Kate, however, lifted her head wearily to look at the guy. Kate's father suddenly noticed that the guy from the video was in front of him, and then he said that nothing good could come from such a moron, and that he was only sticking to their Kate. But before the man could finish speaking, John swung his club, hitting him on the head. Unable to stay on his feet from such a blow, Kate's father fell backwards onto the floor. John, putting his club behind his back, said that even if he was usually rude, he at least respected his elders. The boy's face twisted in irritation as he muttered that selfish old men like them were the exception. Urus looked questioningly at the boy, thinking that he had addressed all the elders in the Hallison Guild informally. Lying on the floor, Kate's father screamed that they were, in fact, Kate's parents. A vein bulged in the guy's face with anger when he said that it was all a lie, and then asked about the world in which parents beat their children and extort money from them. Kate's mother exclaimed that he should ask Kate himself because they really were her parents. Frowning even more, the guy said that he hated it when games repeated reality. And then, what was the point of the game? The woman choked with indignation, and then noted that this is why children become like that when they play. John ignored the woman and asked Kate why she was just sitting there when she was hit. He chuckled and told her not to hold back, as her level here was higher. Hearing this, Kate looked at the guy with her eyes wide open in surprise. But then she quietly said that these people were still her parents. John frowned again and, picking his nose, said that it was disgusting. Why behave the same way as in life? It was pathetic. He said he understood the atmosphere in her family, but why play if she was acting like a loser? Why keep running away? Hearing this, Kate finally stood up and quietly told the guy that he knew nothing and understood nothing. Tears began to flow from her eyes again as she exclaimed that he couldn't even imagine how she had lived with this all this time. And suddenly this time Kate's mother came closer and hit the girl in the face. She screamed, asking Kate what she meant, since they were the victims here. The woman screamed that no matter if it was reality or a game, they were still not parents. Kate, hearing this, became even more angry and clenched her teeth. But then, laughing, John noticed that the woman had just hit her daughter, and even the stone had more emotions. And then he said goodbye to Kate's parents, saying that she had a high level of strength. He said that even without a weapon, with his bare hands, her blows would sting. And in the meantime, the girl began to turn around, tears dripping from her face. Kate lunged forward, intending to release all the pain, all the suffering she had endured into that blow. And her fist hit her mother right in the face. From such a blow, the woman's body rose into the air and flew away. After that day, Kate admitted in an interview that it was all true. She enjoyed the game all that time. The news was filled with various articles discussing this topic. The host noted that this was quite unusual, because Chrono Life is a fairly realistic game, and he thought that it wouldn't hurt a fly. Kate only responded with a smile that beating monsters to death helps relieve stress. Kate has finally overcome her injury and is now living her life peacefully. The anxiety that troubled her has also disappeared, and she no longer needs glasses. Somewhat embarrassed by this addition, the host noted that the girl was very different from herself in the game. Kate asked with a smile that she was very different. And then, smiling brightly, she said that it is in the game that her true self is revealed. Looking at the girl's radiant smile, the host and everyone who was there blushed, and the girl asked who cares what she really is. And then she repeated John's words about how a game loses its meaning if it imitates reality. John, sitting at home, watched an interview with Kate on TV. The guy just grinned, sighed, and leaned back on the sofa. As he picked up the VR glasses, he thought that maybe it was because of the honest answer. But now Kate has even more fans. As he put his glasses on his head and lay down on the sofa, he thought that he too would support her as a fan. Idle Kate has overcome her trauma, she has truly gotten out of the gaming world, and her real life is also a happy one. When John joined the game, the first thing he encountered was Kate, who was yelling at him for being late again. Asking him if this had already become a habit for him, the girl began to beat the guy. Weakly defending himself from the blows, John tried to justify himself by saying that he was watching a music show, and then she asked if she was live on air right now. With a terrifying face, Kate replied that the interview had been pre-recorded. Kate didn't give up the game after she dealt with the injury. She even started playing more often, and all because her schedule was cut by a third. Turning around, the girl exclaimed that they had no more time and it was time for them to go, and John asked her where they should go. Turning around, she asked him irritably if he was really going to get to the bottom of everything, and then said that she had not yet accepted his apology. And John did not argue with Kate and timidly said that he was already on his way. The sight of the timid boy amused Kate, and she smiled. With her hands on her hips, she exclaimed that she forgave him, but only now. And then she said that now this time he must teach her. John asked Kate, confused, what did it mean to teach this time? But then he immediately remembered how, in the first days of their acquaintance, he asked the girl to teach him. Kate said that she was actually a newbie herself and therefore didn't know anything. The girl turned around, spinning around, and came closer to the guy. Looking up at him, she smiled and asked the boy to teach her everything, calling him sensei. In the best game in the world, Chrono Life, there are many guilds due to the huge number of players. The best guilds of the best are included in the top 5. Their reputation is quite consistent with them. They have sufficient resources and distinctive qualities. However, one of these guilds took a completely different path. They collect data that is more valuable than what the World Guild can collect. Their comprehensive information network covers the entire continent. All members of their guild are of the thief type, and now their numerous corpses are lying on the ground. However, one member of the Robin Hood Guild remained alive, but was unable to do anything. The man jumped up with a sharp movement, rising high into the air, and then, turning over in the air, he stepped onto the slope and ran along it. But suddenly, some man approached him from the side, saying that there was another live rat here. The Robin Hood Guild member swung his weapon, but the stranger dodged it by jumping. His body glowed with blue static as he asked about how he seemed different from the others. And then the stranger disappeared into thin air and bright blue flashes. The Robin Hood Guild member looked up at the sky, thinking that this was some kind of strange, decisive blow. But the next moment, the stranger appeared behind the man and thrust his sword into his back. Smiling, the man noticed that he, too, was not far behind his comrades in terms of level. Blood gushed from the guild member's mouth, staining the mask on his face. He asked the man who he was and why he was doing this. The stranger replied that it was all quite obvious. And then, with blue flashes, some kind of mask began to appear on his face. The man said he was doing it because it was fun, and his face wore the same mask as the Robin Hood Guild members. It was already daytime, and a cart pulled by a huge pink cat was driving along the road. The cab driver, turning to the passengers, said that they were almost there and would soon arrive at the Stone Mountain dungeon. While chewing on his chicken, John noticed that the place was closer than he thought. Waving the map, Kate replied that it wasn't far from there, even if you looked at the map. And then she said that they would be there in about 5 minutes. John and Kate were riding on a rather popular transportation service in Chrono Life, the Meow Cart. The demon cat was transported from the demon world and tamed, then trained to pull a cart. Surprisingly, the founder of this service is an ordinary monster tamer. But his cart has become popular and expanded, which brings in more small businesses. Kate looked outside and exclaimed happily that they were almost there and it was so big. And they were heading to Kamanaya Gora. This dungeon is a giant-sized stone, the highest point of which is at 1205 meters above sea level. The average monster here is level 30, and because of their large number, everyone comes here to develop at the beginning. John thought that this was what he had heard, but he had never been there himself, since the 7th level was an insurmountable barrier back then. And then he looked at the girl sitting opposite him and thought that the main purpose of the trip was something else. Namely, the reason was Kate's training. This time she was more serious than John thought, and somehow they ended up here. Still chewing on the chicken with Eurus, John thought that he didn't know what level he should level it up to. Should they go straight to Eurus's nest and level it up to the maximum? And then, remembering something, John exclaimed that he had a gift, to which the girl remarked that this was quite sudden. And then the guy took something out of his cloak, and it turned out to be some kind of glowing sphere. And soon, instead of this glowing sphere, excellent brass knuckles appeared, of the excellent class. Smiling, John said that he had completely forgotten to return the girl's brass knuckles when he gave her the scarf. He said he had something similar and thought it would be a suitable gift. Suddenly, tears welled up in Kate's eyes. She burst into tears and exclaimed that it was the first time she had received a gift, to to which John replied that she was a popular idol, so she should be showered with gifts, to which the girl asked if all her fans were like him. Kate began to wipe away her tears, and John said that they were clearly not the same. Smiling, Kate thought that this guy really was completely different. And then she thanked the guy, saying that she would use them carefully. And then she asked him what his character's name was. Surprised, John asked her if she didn't know, to which she replied that she had only seen it briefly and had forgotten about it. The guy started to say the name of his character when suddenly the leash slowed down. With a loud meow, the demon cat rose up on its hind legs, refusing to go any further. The cab driver asked his passengers if they were okay. Meanwhile, Kate found herself on top of John. John closed his eyes and asked the girl if she was okay, to which she, also without opening her eyes, replied that she thought she was fine. Finally recovering from the shock and opening their eyes, they were faced with the fact that Kate's hand was in John's groin area. Urus was still hanging in the air, and therefore could only watch this incident with resignation. The demon cat began to meow loudly again, and the driver hurried to calm the cat down. He wanted to ask the cat what was wrong with him, when suddenly he noticed someone's figure on the road. As it turned out, it was the same member of the Robin Hood Guild who had a gaping wound on his chest. After apologizing, the man asked the man if they could help. Everyone in the cart stared at the stranger with surprised faces. Climbing into the cart and still pressing his hand to the wound, he said that he knew nothing about this man. He doesn't know anything, not the level or even his class. It's a mystery. He only knows the character's name. And he also knows that this person is clearly not an ordinary user. A member of the Robin Hood Guild said that it looks like this player can copy objects, because right before his eyes, an exact copy of the Howie mask appeared. And the name of this character is Trophy Guy. Kate, hearing this name, thought and realized that she had never heard anything like it. Urus, however, thought of the word truffle instead, and he immediately imagined a huge truffle. Suddenly, John spoke up, asking the stranger if he could ask him something. And then, picking his nose, John asked the stranger who he was anyway. Kate quickly answered this question. Whispering that it was Duncan from the Robin Hood Guild, John asked the girl if she really knew him. And Urus said that how could he forget when he was there on the day he destroyed 3 million? John sighed and asked what all this had to do with him, since some random player had destroyed his guild. So why help him? Removing the mask from his face, Duncan apologized, saying that they didn't even know his name, and already he was asking for help. John glanced sideways at Duncan's face and said that he had already said that he had no reason to help. But it turned out that Duncan was a beautiful girl, and she introduced herself, saying that she was Duncan, the master of the Robin Hood Guild. And the next moment, John changed his mind completely and said that he had no reason not to help. Kate looked at the guy, thinking that she just needed to see this idiot. Putting her mask back on, Duncan thanked them and said they wouldn't regret it. And then she said that all this has to do with them too. Meanwhile, at Chrono Life headquarters, the server support team was already finishing up their workday. One of the workers said he was jealous because they could go home now, and his colleague said that they both needed to work overtime. Suddenly, someone asked the two about who gave them permission to stay overtime. Smiling, the server support team's team lead, Steven, said that they could both go home and he would work for them. The woman noticed that he had been working overtime for several days, and her colleague asked the man if he hadn't made peace with his wife yet, to which he angrily replied that then he would stay with him. But after a few minutes, the office was empty, and only Steven remained. He chuckled and said that they were all bloody idiots. Sitting down on a chair and opening a drawer of the table, in which lay virtual reality glasses, Steven said that they are all a generation of idiots who only want to play the helots. But he knows how to balance between work and life. Their lives are being destroyed by their attempt to take everything from life, so let them continue to live at the bottom. And then he put virtual reality glasses on his head. Steven bared his teeth and said that now that those annoying idiots were gone, it was time to make some money. Messages were heard that the device was being activated and connecting to the game was beginning. Authorization completed, manager rights were detected, and the game greeted the Trophy Boy, and Steven, or Trophy Boy, appeared in the middle of the open sky. He extended his hand forward and a bright flash of light shone on his palm. Then the flash began to take the form of a sword. And in place of the flash, the executioner's sword appeared, which was of a unique class and the sword of the god of war. The man grinned and said that it was time to do some overtime work. All his statistics were under 99999, and his level was 999. Master level, or 999, is a level that is difficult for even professional players to reach. At master level, you can obtain weapons of a better, or superior class. Due to the leak, this topic became popular among users, but no one has ever seen it. Kate, staring at her excellent class brass knuckles, thought that this was truly the weapon of her dreams. John and Kate had already gotten off the cart and were sitting on the rocks. The girl began hesitantly that she had looked closely at these brass knuckles when she was going to put them on. She asked if it was really a superior class weapon, to which John replied that he had plenty of good stuff, so she could do with it as she wished. And then the girl finally put the brass knuckles on herself and they responded with a bright flash. The flash grew brighter and illuminated both Kate and John. The game announced that Kate was now the owner of excellent brass knuckles. They made a squeaking sound and then turned into simpler, more straightforward brass knuckles. The girl asked what happened and why they now looked so shabby. A message appeared saying that it was a sealed superior knuckle duster because the girl's level was insufficient. This news somewhat annoyed Kate, and she said that it seemed that at a low level this weapon was not very effective, and even the unique item was better. And then her hand came down, lightly hitting the stone. And suddenly the earth that was under this stone began to crack, as if from a strong blow. As it turned out, all this happened because of that weak blow with brass knuckles. Kate was amazed at what this sealed weapon was capable of, and John rolled over. Urus sighed, saying that it seemed like there was nothing special about this weapon. But he so wanted to see it, and John agreed with him. While chewing chicken, Urus asked the guy what he would do next. He asked him if he was going to help Duncan. Sitting down on the ground, John replied that he was already thinking about it. After all, she said that it had to do with him. And then he remembered their recent conversation, when he asked how all this related to him. Duncan asked the guy what he thought the trophy guy's target was.